What's up champs, Xeniverse here. The year of 2010 was a monumental one for the gaming industry, filled with groundbreaking releases, cult classics, and innovative titles that shaped the decade to come, from highly anticipated sequels to bold new IPs. This year delivered something for every kind of player. It was a time when gaming consoles like the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Nintendo Wii were hitting their stride, while PC gaming continued to thrive with both AAA and indie experiences. What made 2010 especially remarkable was the sheer variety of games released throughout the year. Players were treated to everything from massive open world adventures to intense multiplayer shooters and even experimental indie titles that pushed creative boundaries. This is a time when game developers were willing to take risks, introducing bold new ideas that would influence game design for years to come. Additionally, improvements in hardware and software allowed developers to create more visually impressive and technologically ambitious games, leading to some of the most beloved releases in gaming history. In this retrospective, me and a couple other creators will take a month-by-month journey through 2010, highlighting some of the most memorable and influential video games that defined the year. Whether they were technological marvels, storytelling masterpieces, or simply fun and addictive experiences, these games left a lasting impact on the industry and its players. So, grab yourself a drink and a snack and lean back, because you're in for a long one. I even bought a new suit for the first time in 2 years, so you better pay attention. "2010 started off like any other year, with January, but unlike other years, 2010's January was actually a pretty solid month, as on the 5th, we start the year off strong with Vigil's Darksiders. It introduced players to a post-apocalyptic world filled with mythological and biblical influences.
Demons, angels, seven seals, huge monsters, action gameplay, edgy design, Darksiders has it all. Darksiders represents that core era of 2010 when a game like this could still work, when you could just give people a bunch of combos, some cool weapons, and some demons to kill, and they were ready. That spirit is sort of the skin that Darksiders wears, because that's what it feels like on the surface, but there's a lot more underneath. The game was released in early 2010 and was developed by Vigil Games, a studio founded by a bunch of people with little experience in the games industry. In Darksiders, we control one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, specifically war. The kingdoms of heaven and hell are at an eternal conflict. The third kingdom, that of the humans, were not strong enough yet to wage war against the others, so a sort of deal was brokered. Once they rose up and gained power, seven seals would be broken, bringing about the apocalypse and the end war. The breaking of these seals would trigger the four horsemen to enforce the rules of the Charred Council and bring about the apocalypse. At the beginning of the game, war is summoned and the apocalypse seems to have begun, only the seals haven't been broken, and War's brothers are nowhere to be found. War is accused and tried by the council, having his powers stripped in the classic action-adventure structure. Our goal is then to figure out what happened, who triggered the false alarm, and brought Earth to its destruction. We do this by slaying demons, defeating bosses, upgrading weapons, and it's a damn good time. Darksiders combat doesn't feel like it's aged a day in the last 15 years. It's smooth and paced out properly, so you constantly feel like you're being drip-fed new abilities. It's just overall fun to play, but my favorite part about the game is its world. Darksiders sounds very edgy and gritty when described on the surface, and while the game doesn't shy away from gore, it's certainly no Dante's Inferno. It's got this unique, cartoony style for the time, and everything in this game just looks like Darksiders.
War. Are you here to play executioner? They should have sent all 4 of you.
The game feels like it learns so much from the action games that came before it, like it's a product of its time because it came slightly after. And I remember playing Darksiders a lot when I was a kid because I just couldn't put it down. The game still has that same addicting level design today. It always feels like there's something around the corner that you're going to want to see. There's some drawbacks, like really annoying challenge designs in the early game that force you into these trials that are way too easy, or the pseudo-open world design that leaves you wandering around for chests of souls. The game almost feels like it was in need of some sort of larger movement system, or my personal favorite gripe, the on-rails shooting sections that are way too long for their own good. Despite all this, Darksiders has a really interesting world that doesn't feel like it's been sapped or beaten to death. It's got an interesting style that I think was probably quite a bit ahead of its time, and it has gameplay that makes you want to keep getting better. The game would do pretty well commercially, and would eventually spawn 2 sequels that would attempt to make War's Horsemen siblings the main characters, Death and Fury, each with their own entry. The games both had their own development troubles and drawbacks as well, and whether this whole franchise has been a massive success is debatable. But if we're just talking about Darksiders, like I said, it has it all.
Did you know? Darksiders' art direction was led by Joe Madureira, a comic book artist known for his work on Uncanny X-Men and Battle Chasers.
On January 12th, we got EA's Army of Two: The 40th Day, the sequel to the 2008 co-op focused shooter Army of Two. The 40th Day refined its predecessor's mechanics while introducing a darker, more gripping narrative.
2010 was an absolute banger of a year for the gaming industry and kicked off the 21st century with some iconic titles that were released during the midway point of the Xbox 360's and PS3's lifecycle. We had classics such as Call of Duty Black Ops, Halo Reach, Heavy Rain, and Mafia II, which is just to name a few and are some of the games which have already been covered in this extraordinary video so far. Us gamers in 2010 were eating very good, yet in 2010 there were some lesser known sequels that were released, such as the follow-up to the original Army of Two, which was Army of Two: The 40th Day, developed by EA Montreal and published by EA themselves for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. It was then later released surprisingly for the PSP. Army of Two: The 40th Day released during the golden era of EA, when they were releasing stellar titles such as Dead Space, Dragon Age Origins, Mirror's Edge, and Mercenaries 2. So when a sequel to the well-received Army of Two was announced for 2010, the gaming community was hyped to see what EA would deliver next with their most iconic cooperative experience yet. Army of Two: The 40th Day is a third-person cover shooter with a huge focus on cooperative play and in-depth weapon and mass customization. EA were marketing this game as the most advanced weapon customization seen in a video game, which was a pretty bold statement. It's a continuation of the character stories from the original Army of Two. Both Rios and Salim, who are now both private military contractors, working together. In Army of Two: The 40th Day, Rios and Salim head to Shanghai after receiving a new contract requesting them to perform a simple job for a ton of money, which requires them to plant locator beacons in a particular area of Shanghai. Sounds simple enough? Well, not quite. Soon after planting the locator beacons, things go from good to an absolute shit show in seconds, with the entirety of Shanghai being reduced to rubble by incoming artillery fire from an unknown terrorist group. I mean, at this point in the game, I got hit by a f***ing plane. From here on, the story follows Rios and Salim battling their way out of Shanghai, which is on the brink of chaos, while they fight the terrorist group known as the 40th Day Initiative. When starting up the game, you can choose what character you wish to play as, and they both play the exact same. There isn't anything particularly special about one of them, which would have been cool if EA included some sort of feature like that, but it is just personal preference as who do you want to play as. The gameplay is what you can expect from a classic third-person cover shooter, which is structured into chapters, and each one consists of you fighting your way through unique areas of Shanghai. which may be a skyscraper for one mission or a zoo for another. You'll battle different enemy types, from your standard grunts to enemies equipped with shields, miniguns, or even grenade launchers. Each enemy type does pose somewhat of a challenge, and it's up to you and your partner to work together effectively to take them down, since this game has a strong emphasis on co-op play. Unfortunately though, the servers for this game are now shut down, and you can no longer play co-op with your friends. So I had to rely on the bot, which surprisingly was helpful at moments, but as you can guess, it was also terrible in a lot of moments as well.
Help me out over here! Give me a hand, Rios.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
It's pretty cool that when playing solo, you can command the bot on the fly what their playstyle should be. You can order them to hold back and defend their position, or order them to move forward aggressively, and they do listen to your commands well. The only issue which I had with the bot most of the time was getting them to come to co-op action points where I needed to open a door or scale a wall to get through to the next area, but required their help. They just wouldn't come to me because they seemed like they were having a moment for themselves. Besides this though, the constant shooting is broken up with hostage scenarios where you and your partner need to work together to strategically stop the enemies from neutralizing the civilians of Shanghai. I'm not gonna lie though, these hostage scenarios were a piece of cake. You didn't really need to do much, since when you come across one of these scenarios, the game directly puts you behind the enemy group's commander, which all you need to do is to take him down and the rest will surrender. So you've got to be pretty bad at this game to cock this up. When saving civilians, you will get a morality boost, which is this game's karma system, but it doesn't impact the story whatsoever, other than a little helping hand at the end of the game, which I won't spoil. So when saving civilians, you just get a nice boost to your score at the end of each chapter, and that's pretty much it. I think it would have been cool if EA implemented a deeper karma system, which, depending on how you play, impacts the ending you get. Speaking of karma, at the end of each chapter, you get a chapter closing cutscene where you are given a unique morality choice, which impacts the following scene you get. These choices are slightly different because if you decide to be good, then once again you get a nice morality boost, increasing your score at the end of the chapter. However, if you decide to be bad, then you might get a nice lump sum of money or a reward of some kind. Again though, these choices that you make throughout the game do not impact the ending you get, which is a disappointment. When advancing through the game and killing enemies, stealing their supply crates and making morality choices, you will be rewarded with money. Money in Army of II: The 40th Day allows you to purchase new weapons and customize them however you like. I will admit the customization for your weapons in this game is pretty cool for a game that was released in 2010. You can pretty much customize any aspect of your weapon. You can change the barrel, stock, front mount, suppressor, scope, and style. There are so many options for each aspect of your weapon that you can change, which is exciting. It's wild that you can change an M4's barrel to an AK's barrel if you want, or even put a screwdriver on the end of your weapon to act as a bayonet. Of course, all of these customization options will impact your weapon's performance, but I decided to have fun with customizing my weapon, and I wasn't bothered with how it performed. I just wanted it to look as cool as possible. Another staple mark of Army 2 is the characters' masks, and you can change them from a bunch of presets available. The campaign is very short and can be completed in around 4 to 5 hours. During my playthrough, I completed the game in just about 5 hours, and it didn't overstay its welcome. I think for what Army of II: The 40th Day offers the player in terms of its gameplay, 5 hours for the campaign is more than enough, because I did find that near the end of the game, everything becomes very repetitive and boring. The only criticism I have with this game is that the multiplayer side of things is no longer available, so you can't play the game in the way EA intended you to experience it with your friends. I can't imagine if I played this game co-op with a friend, I would have had so much more fun, and I would probably do multiple playthroughs on different difficulties.
Did you know? Army of II: The 40th Day's morality choices were inspired by real-world psychological experiments, such as the Milgram experiment.
Exactly 1 week later, on the 19th, we got Airtight Games' debut title, Dark Void, a game that aimed to blend third-person shooting with aerial combat, giving players access to a jetpack that allowed for high-speed dogfights and vertical firefights. The concept was ambitious, evoking the spirit of classic pulp science fiction, but execution fell short in some areas. While the jetpack mechanics were thrilling and provided a unique gameplay twist, the overall combat and level design lacked the polish needed to make it a standout hit. Despite its shortcomings, Dark Void remains an interesting experiment in blending different gameplay styles. One of the game's most intriguing aspects was its attempt to integrate vertical cover mechanics, allowing players to shoot at enemies above or below them while hovering with the jetpack. This added an extra layer of strategy that, while promising in theory, often felt clunky due to inconsistent controls and camera issues. The narrative, centering around an alternate dimension filled with mysterious alien forces, had potential but was weighed down by uninspired writing and underdeveloped characters. While Dark Void failed to reach its full potential, it remains a cult curiosity for players interested in unconventional game mechanics and the occasional thrill of high-speed aerial combat. And lastly, exactly 1 week later, we got arguably the most significant release of the month. Mass Effect 2 raised the bar for storytelling and character development in video games. BioWare crafted an emotionally gripping narrative that saw Commander Shepard assembling a team for a seemingly impossible mission against the enigmatic Collectors.
Mass Effect 2, 2010's much anticipated sequel to 2007's swashbuckling space adventure with light elements of cosmic horror and journalist punching. Widely regarded as the best in the trilogy for its character focus, its continuation of rich and immersive world building, its cinematic improvements over its predecessor, and of course, who could forget, alien boobies. This game has everything you could possibly want but are likely deprived of in the real world. Respect, friendship, adventure, and a f***ing spaceship. Think about it. You were born too late to explore the world, too early to explore the universe, but just in time to live vicariously through the Mass Effect trilogy, venturing to new exotic and dangerous worlds, facing an existential threat that would make H.P. Lovecraft erect, and fraternizing with extraterrestrial organisms. We play as Commander Shepard, who dies immediately. But thanks to scientific advancements in plot armor, a team of mad scientists working for a terror organization brought our rotting corpse back. Why us? Because we're special. We are the only ones remotely capable of taking on the Reapers, giant robotic space squids that have basically come along to harvest us, for reasons we cannot possibly comprehend. But more pressing matters include a mysterious race known as the Collectors abducting entire human colonies for, you guessed it, reasons beyond our understanding. So we need to assemble a team, comprised of both new and old faces renewed through cosmetic surgery by rocket launcher, with whom we must foster relationships and cultivate their trust and loyalty, allowing them to focus squarely on the mission at hand. The mission at hand being to fight our way to the Collector homeworld and save the galaxy from their nefarious schemes. Unlike the modern landscape of short games disguised as incredibly long ones, here we have a long game disguised as an incredibly short one. You can blast your way through it at breakneck pace and reach the Collector homeworld and reap the consequences of not having thoroughly played the game if you so wish to do so, but Mass Effect 2 is thoroughly a game that rewards you for taking your time, engaging in a variety of activities from getting to know your crew to loyalty missions, understanding what makes each squad member tick, to probing planets to upgrade the Normandy, all increase your chances of success, survival, and the survival of your crew. The probing is hardly my favourite task in the world. It's a bit monotonous, but you do get some information on the planets you're probing, and resources are fairly easy to come by, which is useful considering how much of each of them you need to acquire. And there are anomalies on some planets that may turn out to be missions that you can only find through doing this, and the game knows exactly what you want to do and lets you.
Really, Commander? Probing Uranus.
But the bulk of the game focuses on building up your crew, recruiting, getting to know them as people, and then acquiring their loyalty. And the game has safeguards to ensure that you can't not pay attention. You need to build up a bias in your morality system, or some dialogue options essential to ensuring all your crew stays loyal will not be available to you. This is especially useful in moments where two crew members might have a disagreement. There are also some loyalty missions that can be failed if you don't pay enough attention to the details, and the end result is, ideally, the player is thoroughly invested and involved in everything going on. And these stories aren't dull either. Every character in your squad has a unique backstory and a unique loyalty mission. Does this mean Mass Effect 2 lacks for dull moments? No, but it significantly mitigates them by implying the potential for there to be meaning behind every action. And that seeps into every corner of this game, regardless of where you are and what you're doing. However, you could criticise Mass Effect 2's morality system for being a tad too simple. Split into two opposites of Paragon for good and Renegade for bad, to pass skill checks for the best outcomes, the game typically relies on the player committing to one over the other, and mixing them, at least prior to the remaster, wasn't to be recommended. So if you're enjoying a Paragon playthrough, your best bet is to avoid any Renegade options, and that sadly cheats you out of some of the best moments the game has to offer.
You're working too hard.
See? The human cannot hit a simple target.
Fortunately, this has been rebalanced in the remaster so you can at the very least dip your toes in the renegade waters without lasting irrational consequence. Away from that, let's talk some gameplay. Mass Effect 2 is neither open world nor linear. It's a series of hub areas, from the bustling wards of the Citadel to the crime-ridden streets of Omega. Ilium, however, that's just gay Coruscant. The fourth hub area, of course, are the floors of the Normandy itself, that you use to travel between them and any other mission location. There's plenty to find and engage with in these world spaces that help them feel alive, interactions and side objectives galore, that goes an incredibly long way in making the game feel non-linear. But the actual mission design beyond this is quite linear. You shoot your way through swathes of corridors filled with waves of enemies, with plentiful interruptions for dialogue, which, as we've already gone over, is just as integral to the gameplay as the shooting itself, and you're always accompanied by 2 squad mates, and that allows you to command them. You can choose what weapons they utilise, and what powers they use and when, and of course, who on. But while most missions do indeed pertain to the corridor shooter dynamic, the game isn't afraid to shake things up. Certain missions don't require any shooting at all, relying on dialogue and the choices you make to guide you from the start to the end point. And yes, while the shooter aspects are certainly higher octane, with plenty of weaponry, classes, and abilities to play around with, there's something to be said for when the mission structure deviates to something altogether different, and you find the game relying squarely on gripping storytelling to keep the player engaged. And Mass Effect can get away with this because the cutscenes aren't just transitions between gameplay and gameplay. There are plenty of cutscenes that are just that, but ordinarily the cutscenes are a part of the gameplay too. Opportunities for you to make important decisions, acquire important information, and influence outcomes. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss the split-second decisions you can make, such as punching a reporter in the face.
I've had enough of your disingenuous assertions.
And this, if anything, helps the game stand out. While I'd argue the shooter element certainly saw improvement from Mass Effect 1, I'm not going to sit and pretend it's anything spectacular. There's a great enemy variety, a great assortment of weaponry you can utilise, a great assortment of abilities depending on your classes, and of course, your squad mates all have their own abilities and weapons and skill sets, and the environments themselves are visibly diverse and fun to soak in. But it doesn't break ground necessarily, it's just a good shooter. No, what makes Mass Effect 2 special is an extension to what made Mass Effect 1 special. Its emphasis on rich, warm, fuzzy world building to counteract the cosmic horror that occurs at its fringes. The Mass Effect trilogy is a bit of a comfort series for me. The lore is constructed in such a way that makes it believable, and not only that, makes the universe likeable. Its aspects come together in just the correct formula that allows it to be an easy fun series to sink your teeth into, and each entry boasts its own key strength. Mass Effect 1's was striking a balance between this rich atmospheric world while simultaneously showcasing how empty the universe actually is, and Mass Effect 2's key quality is its emphasis on its fantastic range of characters. Something the original game didn't lack for, but 2 just takes it to new levels. And its artistically inspired cutscenes don't just give the game an overall cinematic edge, it allows for every moment to have a sense of occasion. In this respect, the game is a visual feast. It may not have the best visuals on the market considering its vintage, but it's beyond apparent a lot of effort went into making Mass Effect 2 as stylish as possible. And for the most part at least, that effort succeeded. This, however, is not a game without negatives. A big one was the original version being an EA property, at a time when they were on a verifiable mad one about making as much of a game as possible. DLC was utterly splintered with expansions and downloadable content, from simple outfits to entire quest lines, some of which were good and some really just weren't. So it's a bloody good job the Legendary Edition remasters feature all 3 games and all of their expansions, and isn't just a bullshit remaster to cash in while doing the bare minimum. Honestly, I could probably talk at length all day about Mass Effect 2 and still not cover half of its redeeming qualities. It's certainly one of the greats of 2010. I'd even go so far as to say it's an all-time great for me. And it's great to revisit a game of heart, soul and passion, especially as the modern games industry continually succumbs to corporate inclinations. There's so much character here, so much atmosphere, there's so much information to soak in, even in a game that's quite tightly packed. And even despite taking your time and soaking in as much information as possible, Mass Effect 2 still feels like an incredibly fast-paced, exciting experience, one that time frankly cannot kill my love for. So if you've never played this game, and you've been debating it, take this as a sign to just go for it and enjoy. But don't just take this as a recommendation, take it as a threat as well. Play Mass Effect 2, or I'll appear at the end of your bed. I will be your personal sleep paralysis demon until you fire this game up and enjoy it, you butt. And if you're incited into action through the thought of doing a good deed, just spare a thought for this journalist's dentist. Oh, and by the way, the replay value is insane. You'll fire it up, make the exact same choices repeatedly over the course of various playthroughs, and still like it. If you're anything like me, that is. Thank you for listening to me talk nonsense for 10 minutes. I must now attempt to escape this basement. I fear Mr. Zaniverse is currently checking my browser history, and that is not something I can in good conscience allow. I'm doing this for his own good. Otherwise he'll need to go into witness protection. My name's been Fishy, unless you've seen me on the street corner selling fake postage stamps, in which case it's Brian. It's always been Brian. You saw nothing. Thanks for listening to my nonsense. I'll see you soon.
Did you know? Originally, Mass Effect 2 was going to have a much darker and more survivalist tone, focusing on Shepard being on the run from the Council.
February continued the year's strong schedule with a range of titles that span genres and styles, intense shooters, emotional dramas, and even quirky cult classics. On the 9th, we got the sequel to the critically acclaimed BioShock. 2K's BioShock 2 returned players to the underwater dystopia of Rapture, this time placing them in the boots of a Big Daddy. While it didn't have the same surprise factor as the original, the game expanded on the world's lore and introduced new gameplay mechanics.
The first BioShock came out in a year of genre-defining classics. 2007 was truly peak, with Rapture becoming one of the most well-realized settings in gaming. Between its release and Infinite in 2013, 2010's BioShock 2 is treated as the middle child, coming and going as a pretty decent game with little reverence. The culprit was a setup, as you play as a Big Daddy, searching for your lost little sister Eleanor and fighting off the Rapture family led by Dr. Lamb. Lacking the big wow factor that cemented the other titles, and having to play as the Big Daddy, the original game's most tedious section was met with great fan chagrin. However, improved mechanics, great presentation, and a solid story have started making players come around to it. For a 15-year-old game, it still looks great. The decayed cityscape of Rapture, the ocean gradually consuming the buildings, a mix of rot and life, can feel haunting and beautiful. The game would look even better if I could turn on the DirectX 10 features, except the game will crash after 20 minutes. There's no hiding the fact BioShock 2 has a crummy PC port. I got lucky after disabling DirectX in the launcher, but there's no universal solution. Just save often. The story is a pretty slow first hour of reintroducing the setting and establishing how this is a much more personal story regarding the relationship of the Big Daddies and the Little Sisters, culminating in 3 really interesting endings. After this lengthy opening, the game really opens up. The levels are large and distinctive, each easily taking over an hour, filled with explorable side paths that reward in supplies, lore, and tonics. It helps too that the gameplay is broadened substantially, the obvious being the dual wielding of firearms and plasmids, creating interesting combos against enemies who are more numerous and aggressive. Plasmids are more useful in combat as the frequent puddles of water and oil, turrets to control, and explosive canisters to toss offer a nice diversity in tactical choices. The guns are quite fun to use. The shotgun sounds very meaty, and the drill has a charge attack that absolutely bodies enemies. Upgrades of plasmids and guns are more than just a damage buff. They now have secondary effects like elemental damage, chaining attacks, and larger area of effect, and buffing enemies and sentries you control. You can become a powerhouse by topping up on tonics. The 18 slots available allows you to specialize and create unique tonic builds, and makes exploration that much more rewarding. Hacking and researching is a lot of fun too. It's a simple minigame and a hacking tool that can be used in any electronics. Bringing in a drone swarm makes firefights very chaotic. Researching enemies is an active process now, filming your targets as you fight them, leveling up faster by combining attacks. That leaves the most controversial change of BioShock 2, having to escort the Little Sisters around instead of just rescuing or harvesting them. Yeah, lumbering between corpses to harvest Adam again and again definitely turns off newcomers, and I can't blame them. Except you provided a ton of Adam and there's plenty of good plasmids and tonics to spend on, and the whole process fully engages the combat mechanics. All the additional trap-based ammo types and hacking options aren't just bloat. Their inclusion is so you can quickly fortify your position from waves of attackers as the Little Sister gathers Adam. You're already a slow-moving bastard. I think having efficient defensive options that aren't cumbersome is a good thing. It's a system that I almost really like, if not for the ensuing control parlor. This is a very console game, yet it highly encourages rapid switching between weapons, plasmas and ammo types, and it's just too damn slow and clunky. Often I've been knocked around as I cycle between plasmas and ammo types, relying on my stockpile of medkits to carry me through. BioShock 2 isn't even a hard game. Vita chambers always respawn you, and the little sisters can't actually die, so if you lose a battle, it's a few minutes of walking to a vendor, restocking your items, and trying again, unless you want to save scum. This can be very egregious during big sister fights. Very cool mini-bosses and an upgrade over big daddies in the nimble movement, not as much as they camp around and kill you again after respawning. This was the biggest blemish for me when playing. I felt drunk half the time, and turned a great game into a really good game. I'd still heartily recommend BioShock 2. It's cheap as heck, widely available, and there's a real payoff both in the gameplay and seeing the story to its conclusion. It's unfortunate all the improvements were abandoned in Infinite, yet it was refreshing to finally realise how nice BioShock 2 actually was.
Did you know? BioShock 2's multiplayer mode, Fall of Rapture, was developed by Digital Extremes, the same studio behind Warframe.
On the same day, we also got Visceral's Dante's Inferno. Very loosely inspired by the first canticle of Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, Dante's Inferno was a bold and controversial hack-and-slash adventure.
Dante's Inferno is a bombastic, over-the-top, edge-fest hack-and-slash video game developed by Dead Space developer Visceral Games, RIP, and published by EA We Kill Studios Games. It's in the greed.
You're so full of greed and hate. Is that all you had to offer me?
This game might have been described a time or two as a simple God of War clone with a Catholic theme, but anyone who's actually even a passing enjoyer of this game will quickly tell you that it's so much more than that, and that such an oversimplification doesn't do the game justice. The majority of the level design is revolting, hellish, and dare I say, visceral in the best of ways. The gameplay is tight-knit and exciting, not to mention how genuinely unique the overall experience is. It does admittedly take a great deal of inspiration from games like God of War and Devil May Cry, but it goes on to utilize those ideas and mechanics to create a riveting experience that makes the player feel simultaneously empowered and out of their depth.
Not yet.
Of course, given that it's based on the original Divine Comedy epic by the IRL Dante Alighieri, the player will be taken through all 9 circles of hell. Limbo, lust, gluttony, greed, wrath, heresy, violence, fraud, and treachery. I'd like to say each of these 9 circles were designed with an admirable creative inspiration, but that simply isn't true, as the devs seem to phone it in on the 8th circle of fraud in particular, likely due to budget or deadline constraints. That said, the majority of the circles are very impressive and feature the kind of unique visuals that I've never been able to find anywhere else since. Both a sequel and a 2D side-scroller iteration of the original were being worked on, but ultimately got cancelled since the game underperformed.
Damn you. What more can you take from me?
Is that a dare?
But there was an animated film released based on the game that retells the game's iteration of the original poem across multiple different animation styles. Unfortunately, this very special epic remains stranded on the Xbox 360, PS3, and PSP to this day, as EA Games seemingly refuses to support a potential PC port or remaster of any kind.
No. I give up on this journey.
All of that said, Dante's Inferno remains not only one of the most interesting video games EA has ever published, but also one of the most iconic video games ever released on 7th generation consoles.
No one can stop me. One can.
Did you know? Dante's Inferno's Trials of St. Lucia DLC hinted at a sequel where Dante would explore both Purgatory and Heaven. Sadly, a sequel was never made, as Visceral Games instead opted to focus on Dead Space 2.
February 18th, Rebellion's Aliens vs Predator released, rebooting a beloved franchise. AVP let players experience the conflict from 3 different perspectives: Alien, Predator, and the Colonial Marines.
I had just become obsessed with the Alien and Predator movies right after this game came out. I remember watching trailers for it and just getting really excited about the potential. I bought it sometime around 2012 when I was 14 or so, and I remember really liking it, but it's been so long since I last played it. This project was the perfect reason for me to check it out again. It was made by Rebellion Developments. They had made the classic Alien vs. Predator game from the year 2000, and they're also well known for the Sniper Elite series. It was published by Sega. The game features 3 campaigns: Humans, Predator, and Aliens. Jumping into the Human campaign, we're working for Weyland Corp. They've just uncovered an ancient artifact of the Predators, and when opening it, it becomes a beacon, which causes a Predator mothership to show up. It shoots down the Humans' mothership and everyone starts freaking out. We crash land on the alien planet, but we're knocked out by something, and we've got this long sequence where our character is passing in and out of consciousness. It does a decent job building up the horror elements from the Alien movies, keeping that atmosphere very much alive. While the graphics certainly feel very 2010, there's a stylized element to it that made it age decently well. After a short tutorial, we're exploring the desolate wastelands where all our fellow men have been slaughtered. I will say the gunplay in this game never felt great to me. It's not bad at all, but it's always felt empty. Though shooting xenomorphs is pretty fun. They can react in a lot of different ways, even shooting off their legs and having them crawl. As you keep playing, you'll encounter the Predator, the combined Predalien form, the Alien Queen, and more. It's a decent campaign, but it gets boring pretty fast. A lot of spots where we gotta hold down a certain location, and it sometimes has that theme park ride vibe to it. The structure and design of all the missions feel very straightforward and simple. There aren't many cool set pieces or memorable moments. Overall, the Human campaign is just alright. The Predator campaign starts with us taking a trial to become a proper hunter. We learn to fight dealing with xenomorphs, while our elders teach us what we need to know. You can do light and heavy attacks, block. If your enemy is stunned or unaware that you're there, you can do an insta-kill with E, which gives you a bunch of unique animations that can be very gruesome. You can fool people by playing voices. You can go invisible, use various special weapons, shoot them with your plasma gun. Doing big jumps feels so satisfying. There's a good amount of variety in all the enemies you fight too. They did a good job making it fun to stealth around and take people down one by one. It's a campaign I always get the most enjoyment out of revisiting because it feels the most fleshed out from a gameplay sense. Whenever the xenomorphs pop up, it becomes an all-out brawl. And whenever the humans are around, you gotta take a stealthier and smarter approach, while still having some fun bosses to deal with from time to time. It can certainly become a little samey, but not nearly as much as the other 2 campaigns. Speaking of which, the Alien campaign starts with a long sequence of 6, the protagonist xenomorph you play as, being born. Weyland takes a special interest in you, and they send you through special tests. It's a very long and slow opening, although it does a good job building up to a satisfying payoff where you can finally kill all those damn scientists. Crawling around on walls feels a little clunky, but the movement is pretty fun. You can go really fast, jump through vents and stuff. The combat is okay, but I just find myself spamming light attacks most of the time. There's some stealth needed to progress, but you can go pretty wild thanks to your speed. You take down humans, androids, and of course the Predator, and you can also call forth the facehuggers, and you're following the commands of the Alien Queen. There's mostly just humans and androids to deal with, but of course the Predator makes things a little more interesting. Outside of that, this one gets really repetitive, and the environments aren't that interesting to me. I still think it holds up decently well though, and that goes for the game as a whole. There's also survival mode where you fight against waves and see how long you can make it. You can play up to 4 players online. There are other multiplayer modes too, like Infestation mode, where one person starts out as a xenomorph and each human that dies will become an alien too, until everyone has become xenomorphs. There's Domination, where you have to take over control points and hold them. Then there's the classic Deathmatch mode. I even played that online with friends back in the day. You could make a lot of customized rules for each game. But my favorite was a Predator hunt. One person plays the Predator and the rest are human marines. You've got a time limit to take out as many humans as possible. It was so much fun. We were just kind of role-playing as we played together. I would love trying to spook all the human players, hiding around, randomly firing plasma, and it was always fun when you got spotted and had to hide again. I wish this game could have gotten a bit more polished. Some elements feel clunky, and the campaigns could have been a lot more fleshed out. That would have made it a lot easier to recommend, but as it stands, it's an alright game that might be worth your time. That's all I got for you this time. Thanks for watching.
Did you know? Alien vs Predator was initially refused classification in Australia due to its extreme violence, but Sega refused to censor the game, and after an appeal, the ban was overturned.
February 23rd saw our first triple release of the year, with the first of the trio being Deadly Premonition, a cult classic in the making. Developed by Axis Games, Deadly Premonition defied traditional expectations with its bizarre storytelling, surreal characters, and clunky gameplay.
Deadly Premonition. We've improved that you can indeed be high for the entirety of a game dev cycle. You see, attempting to review Deadly Premonition in 3 to 5 minutes is about as easy as finding a Valorant game that doesn't end with you being yelled at by someone who desperately needs anger management glasses. If you don't believe me, just search Deadly Premonition on YouTube. You'll find that most reviews that are not made by generic companies with the goal of manipulating the algorithm for views all pass the 1 hour mark. That's because it's really hard to put into words why this game is so horrible, but at the same time, a masterpiece.
Zach, he needs some friends who aren't so dumb.
And I'm definitely not going to be the one that's going to do that in less than 5 minutes. The best I can do is give you a TLDR. Where do I even start with this? Deadly Premonition is amongst some of the jankiest, horrible to control, most confusing games you can find, while having one of the wildest, most stupid, out of nowhere, funny horror plots I have ever had the pleasure of experiencing. You play as Agent York. Well, technically you control him, but he's very aware of that, to the point that it's very hard to find a cutscene that doesn't end with him not addressing Zach, which is supposed to be the fictional player, aka you.
Zach, Thomas appears to be the kind and sensitive type, totally at odds with the monarch. Almost a good setting for a cartoon.
Anyways, York is tasked with solving a series of murders happening in the fictional town of Greensville, Washington. But, thanks to York having zero responsibility or care for anyone including himself, he decides that while driving in the middle of the mountains and while rain pours harder than your average PlayStation 2 rain, he should take this opportunity to take a look at the case he's working on, resulting in a shocking and out of nowhere accident. Small note though, nice squirrel sound effects. After almost dying due to being the world's most dangerous man on the road, the following events happen, and pay attention please. You wander around the forest for a bit, then you get ambushed by Resident Evil zombies, but from Wish, you then, get jumped by the main bad guy, that then grabs you, throws you to the ground, and runs away like he just got caught spying on you playing with that big metal pipe of yours. After the encounter with that uncle from your family that everyone just refuses to acknowledge exists, you then literally waste 10 minutes doing nothing but pressing W. To then finally meeting another human, which York's first thought is to desperately wanting to take the first girl he sees to Ooga Booga Town.
Easy on the eyes. Definitely worth a trip to the primitive world.
Then you immediately jump into a sequence where you learn how to hold your breath with a kid by your side so that the zombie doesn't see you, instead of, moving away from the zombie. Then you realize it was all a dream. So, without missing a beat, I might add, you immediately get up, pop out a cigarette and start monologuing about what happened.
Zach, the symbolism in my dreams continues to intensify.
Now, after all of this, we can finally take up Just Kidding. Now it's time to get dressed. And then have a conversation with an old lady while having breakfast in a comically oversized table, which results in the lady misunderstanding what you said, leading the owner of the hotel, I might add, to think that you're flirting with her.
That's nice. Polly, it might help to hear you better if you could sit a little closer.
Oh my, Mr. Morgan, you're embarrassing me. So early in the day, too. I think I'm a little too old for you.
Followed by... Okay. And stay with me here. Coffee reading. The act of reading the future and finding clues depending on the quality of the coffee.
Did you see that, Zach? Clear as a crisp spring morning. F.K. in the coffee. I knew I could count on it. Never fails.
All of this in the first hour of this 18 to 25 hour open world survival horror game. I hope you can now understand why I was one of the last guys to deliver this project. For fuck's sake, I don't even have time to talk about the open world itself, or the goddamn priceless piece of art by the name of Sheriff George. Fucking George! I am so fascinated about this game that every time I got to talk about any mechanics or story bits, I would start having serious thoughts about shaving my head, putting on my robe, and write a 2-hour essay on why Deadly Premonition is genius.
It's a real killer.
Okay, alright, so Zen is already sending me a JPEG with a goddamn gun, so I think I need to wrap this thing up. Let me put it like this. If you're a guy that really loves out of nowhere wacky shit, if you're a guy that understands the word slavjank and loves it, if you're a guy that, well, probably has Kojima as a background desktop, I think you're gonna really love this game. And it might be your new obsession. If none of that resonates with you, however, I think it's pretty much fine to skip this one.
Did you know? Deadly Premonition's main character, Francis York Morgan, is obsessed with coffee and often sees prophecies in his cup. This was heavily inspired by the game director Hidetake Suero's own love for coffee.
Also on the 23rd, we got Quantic Dream's Heavy Rain, a narrative-driven interactive drama that focused on emotional storytelling and moral choices. The game follows 4 characters entangled in the mystery of the origami killer.
When Zany first posted the list of games for this collab, I was indecisive at first. I mean, there were so many bangers to choose from. God of War 3, BioShock 2, Rhine Time the game, but I wanted to play something a little bit more contentious, and that's when I saw it. Heavy Rain, and I locked it in immediately. My only experience with David Cage prior to this was Detroit Become Human, a game that's graphics were so good, it tricked my dumb teenager brain into thinking this was a well-crafted allegory for slavery. So once I matured a little bit and had this grand epiphany, I instantly became curious about the rest of his work. If a game as thoroughly flawed as Detroit is meant to be his magnum opus, how bad does the rest of it get? Heavy Rain has a lot of low lows, in fact that's most of the game, but I can't say I ever felt like a slog, even with the snail-paced walking speed. I wrapped this thing up in like 2 sittings. I mean, I was invested, just probably not for the reasons David Cage intended. Let's lay the groundwork for this story. Ethan Mars is an architect and father of 2 sons, Jason and Sean, respectively. He loses Jason in the mall, and for whatever reason the kid wanders down the escalator, exits the mall, crosses the street, crosses back, gets hit by a car but not really, and somehow kicks the bucket. Fast forward 2 years and a divorced Ethan loses his other son at the park. He learns this was the work of the mysterious origami killer, who leaves him a trail of clues that lead to trials to prove he's ready to suffer to save his son. And it's up to you, the player, in this pretentiously labeled interactive drama type game to save Sean before it's too late. That being said, the gameplay is not this game's strong suit. The controls are absolutely ludicrous. Like, it'd probably be more intuitive to play the original Tomb Raider with a USB steering wheel. This even bleeds into something as simple as the RE menus, where instead of using the directional inputs and X like a normal person, you have to use the motion controls and heave the thing out of the way, which only works like half the time, by the way. Most of the gameplay in this genre is in the form of QuickTime events. Heavy Rain is no exception, and it knows this. Because when you go to select a difficulty option, each level is based on how familiar you are with the controller. Am I familiar with the wireless controller, or perfectly familiar? Who can really say? These are used for everything, for better or worse. I'd say the enjoyment value of QTEs is entirely dependent on what the character's actually doing. Driving against the traffic works really well because there are actual stakes. Norman's goofy chase sequence is fun because you want to catch the guy. Or not. It's pretty funny either way. But QTEs don't work when you're just complicating the completion of absurdly mundane tasks. This is especially evident in every one of Shelby's chapters. It's clear they had no idea what to do for gameplay, so they just threw in whatever came to mind first. That seems to be a common trend in the overall narrative of this game as well. There are just too many main characters, and when it's not their time to participate in the plot, they just sort of exist and take up space. Ethan is more or less an exception to this, as there's always a string of tribulations to follow, but whenever I was playing as the other three, half the time I was just waiting to get back to Ethan. Mostly because I think his voice is pretty funny.
Glass. Broken glass. Sharp as a razor. Impossible to go back.
Scott Shelby is a private investigator on the case who's going door to door interviewing parents of the origami killer's victims. Norman Jayden is the most useless FBI agent ever who literally accomplishes nothing the whole game, at least in my playthrough. He's too busy committing to that Beat Saber grind. Then Madison Page is the journalist that pieces everything together at the last minute, but prior to that, her only role in this game is to satisfy David Cage's horny quota. Let's go through her first chapter, your introduction to this character. She wakes up in a cold sweat, wanders her apartment in her underwear, takes an uncensored shower, then gets jumped by a bunch of masked men, gets killed, only to wake up and realize it was a dream. Chapter over. Why? This never comes back. It has no bearing on the rest of the game. What does this add? You could say that about a lot of other questionable events on her route, but one of the worst offenders by far is this forced romance with Ethan. For some reason, she falls for this random guy at a motel who literally admits to killing someone. But I guess he's got that Skywalker riz, because you get this option later. Now, I said no my first playthrough because I thought it was super contrived. So imagine my surprise to learn that if you do kiss, it's not just a kiss, but a full-on QTE sex scene that you have while your son is drowning in a gutter. Did we forget about that part?
Only one more origami figure. Then I find my son.
At least now he's got that post-nut clarity to solve the rest of the mystery. But I can't lie, man. Standing here, yapping away, I'm having a good time. Like, it is so unbelievably fun to complain about this game. To just point and laugh at every piece of wonky dialogue, every bizarre story decision. Heck, even the motivation for the origami killer himself. As terrible as this game is, I know I'll be returning to it if I ever need a good chuckle. The worst thing a game can be is forgettable, to just leave no impression at all and be lost to the sands of time. Heavy Rain at the very least achieved being memorable, and I can commend it for that. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Zany, and here's to the next review.
Did you know? Heavy Rain had one of the most complex motion capture productions of its time, with over 170 different actors used during its development.
And our third release on the 23rd was Sega's answer to Mario Kart. Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing brought together iconic characters from across Sega's history in a fast-paced, colorful kart racer. With tight controls, well-designed tracks, and a healthy dose of nostalgia, The game appealed to both younger audiences and longtime fans. While it didn't dethrone Nintendo's genre dominance, it offered a polished and fun alternative that helped revive interest in Sega's classic franchises. Each racer came with their own unique vehicle and special moves, drawing from their respective game worlds, which added personality and variety to the gameplay. The title also featured vibrant environments inspired by classic Sega games, such as Super Monkey Ball and Jet Set Radio, giving longtime fans plenty to appreciate. February proved that 2010 wasn't slowing down anytime soon. With emotionally gripping stories, high-speed competition, and eerie horror-infused mystery, the month showcased the medium's diversity and creative range, and March would only continue to build on this momentum. March brought a mix of cinematic spectacle, gritty realism, and chaotic sandbox fun to the forefront, showcasing the growing ambition of developers across genres. March 1st, we got blessed with DICE's Battlefield Bad Company 2. The game elevated the multiplayer shooter experience with destructible environments, large-scale warfare, and refined squad-based gameplay. Building upon the humor and camaraderie of its single-player campaign, the game's true legacy lies in its competitive modes. The Frostbite engine allows players to tear through buildings and reshape the battlefield, making tactics and teamwork more crucial than ever. With a strong class system and addictive progression, Bad Company 2 became a favorite for fans of strategic, large-scale FPS action. Beyond its excellent multiplayer, the game's single-player campaign struck a balance between irreverent humor and military intensity, driven by the returning Bad Company squad. Though not as narrative-driven as some of its contemporaries, it delivered memorable set pieces and solid gunplay. The game's long-lasting popularity helped solidify Battlefield's place as a mainstay in the multiplayer shooter genre. March 16th saw the release of God of War 3. The Santa Monica studio release brought the original trilogy to a climactic close. God of War 3 launched on the PlayStation 3 with jaw-dropping visuals and larger-than-life action. Players once again stepped into the rage-fueled boots of Kratos, who waged war against the gods of Olympus in a brutal quest for vengeance.
2010 truly was one of the very best years for gaming, but when I think of the game that left the biggest impact on me personally, it's God of War 3 all day, every day. I mean, we're talking about one of the most epically violent video games there ever was to conclude an incredible trilogy of violence across ancient Greece. This was a game I'd been eagerly awaiting since God of War 2 finishes with such a dope but also big old tease to be continued. 13-year-old me couldn't wait to finally play the game. When I did, my jaw was on the floor the entire time, and ever since has remained as my favorite game of the series, as well as just simply one of my favorite games of all time. But I'll try and move away from straight up nostalgia talk. Let's talk about why it's so good, and for that we need to start with the story. God of War 3 on its own doesn't have the most impressive story. In fact, it's pretty simple, but it's not on its own. This is where all the backstory, the character development, the sorrow of Kratos from the previous games more or less takes a back seat. We've been there and done that, and whilst there are still some moments like that here, the conclusion to the Greek saga isn't about that. It's about killing everything in sight, and that's where God of War 3 shines. This is the part of Kratos' story that is simply blind rage, and that tone is set right from the very beginning as you take down Poseidon with one of the most gruesome uses of the L3 and R3 buttons. The best way I can describe what this story feels like is, you know when a shark bites and the whites of their eyes roll back and there's nothing but darkness? That's Kratos in God of War 3. He is as ruthless, merciless, and downright sadistic as you can possibly think of, from your standard ground and pounds to things that will surely get this video demonetized, and if you've played the game, you know exactly what those moments are. It's bloody, it's messy, it's absolutely insane, and I just love it. But that's just the setup, because whilst the gameplay definitely fits in the category of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, that doesn't mean it's not perfected in God of War 3. In terms of just the combat, this is the best hacking and slashing of the entire series. It just flows so nicely. It feels like you're taking part in a dance, just with a lot of blood spray. You have access to 4 weapons in the Blades of Exile, the Claws of Hades, the Nemean Cestus, and the Nemesis Whip. And although 3 Chainblade weapons is a little lacking in terms of visual variety, each weapon does feel very different to use in combat. The blades are very smooth and flowing, whereas the claws feel much more heavy and hard hitting, and the whip feels much more fast paced and zippy. But the highlight is the Nemean Cestus. I mean, this is the best weapon in the whole series. These things pack a serious wallop, but the downside is their range is much more limited, which would be an issue if they didn't cover ground extremely well or have the potential to stun most enemies with a single punch. So yes, you can get singularly focused on the cestices, but God of War 3's combat works best when you're blending all the weapons together into the perfect death dance, and it is so satisfying to do so, especially against the game's many bosses. I won't delve too deeply into the boss fights because I am on the clock here, but these are great fights and they're not infrequent like some of the other games. God of War 1 had like 3 boss fights, and here there's 9 if you include Helios, and I do because the ending is badass. There's a boss battle at least every hour, and that means there's so few dull moments. Plus, the Zeus fight is no joke, even on normal. Not unfair, you just need to make sure you have your parries and dodges in check because your health bar will get cooked pretty quickly otherwise. Speaking of dull moments though, God of War 3 does have some problems, and that is the puzzles. The combat always got the lion's share of the gameplay time, but I always enjoyed the platforming and puzzles of the series, and that sadly just isn't really here. The platforming is fine, but the puzzles are just a bit basic and feel more like an afterthought than anything. That's not to say there aren't some bangers. I mean, Hera's Maze is such a fun illusion type puzzle, but then you have things like the music minigame, which is just a weird inclusion. Overall though, God of War 3 is still the best game in the series, and if you disagree for any reason other than I prefer God of War 2, then you're wrong.
Did you know? Hercules was voiced by Kevin Sorbo, who also played him in the 1995 TV series.
Also on March 16th, based on Dmitry Glukovsky's novel, 4A's Metro 2033 delivered a dark and atmospheric journey through a post-apocalyptic Moscow. Combining survival horror, first-person shooting, and stealth mechanics, the game placed players in the role of Artyom, a young man navigating the haunted tunnels of the Metro system.
Oh man, I don't want to be stuck in the Metro again, dude. Alright, might as well do this. Listen up, I was sent here, or at least I was forced to do this by some Dutch-speaking guy. But yes, we're going to talk about Metro 2033, a game that did come out in 2010, and a game that is frankly amazing. That's why I spent 3 hours talking about it on a different channel. But point is, Metro 2033 is honestly a defining game of its time, I would say. Mostly because it is one of the first games, or one of the best games, that has come out of Eastern Europe that actually works. I'm not trying to shit on any of the games. I mean, I love Stalker, and if it wasn't for Stalker, we wouldn't have Metro 2033. But the thing is, these two games are so different in what they are trying to do. One game is all about having an sort of open world-ish kind of aesthetic where you just want to run around, do whatever the hell you want, versus the other game, which is more on the rails, and that's Metro 2033. And sometimes I think that's good. I don't think every game needs to be fully open world and let you do whatever you want, but I mean, even that they did later on with Exodus. But what's the deal with Metro 2033 though? Well, to start with, the game is amazing. I think the best thing about it is just the immersive feeling of it. Like, everything feels so down to earth. I mean, unless you want to just, ignore the vast amount of mutants and communists and a few very edgy Germans. Point is, there's a lot of interesting stuff in this game that makes it so unique and fun. The story is, of course, based on books that were written as well. Metro 2033, that's where it all comes from. And these books are a must-read. If you want to understand the Metro world a bit better, but also if you just want to read some great books, and if you're really into post-apocalyptic shit, you're gonna like these. So what's the game even about? Well, basically, the entire world has gone to shit after everybody decided to nuke each other, and so we're stuck in the metros of Moscow. And while down here, you'll be going around and just playing as a man named Artyom, trying to find, well, meaning in this tunnel. And you're also dealing with just taking out a weird alien-looking group of people that seem to be able to control minds. It's all a little bit funky, and then you nuke them in the end, which is also kind of funky. I mean, the game is a first-person shooter to start with, so you're going to be going around and shooting a lot. Honestly, the morality system in this game was a little bit funky. I mean, it wasn't unique for its time. We already had a lot of morality systems before this, or like the concept of a morality system wasn't necessarily new, but it was something they tried to do, which kind of fits in with the story of the game more so than anything. It's really important for the story what choices you make. But in terms of the actual gameplay, though, again, you go around shooting stuff. You do have stealth sections. They're not like the best stealth sections in games I've seen before, but I really think this game wins on the fact that it's really immersive. And when I say immersive, I mean the graphics in this game for 2010, Molto bene. It looked really good. Of course, it has been reduxed now in the future. They made a sort of upgraded remaster version of it, which a lot of people didn't like, because it made some changes to difficulty, but this game is hard, okay? You play this shit on the hardest difficulty, you're gonna struggle. And I kind of like that. I kind of like that there is a bit of a struggle to the game. It's not just like vault in and do whatever you want. It does require quite a bit of effort to go through the entire thing and not get chomped to death. Again, back to the whole immersiveness thing. I think one of the things that actually makes it really fun is the fact that there's so many things in this world. Like, the actual world building that they've done from the books over to the game is so well executed. There's the different groups you keep encountering, the different groups from the Metro, because there's so many clans or factions, if you want to call them that, right? So many different factions that operate differently and sort of have rivalries or beef with each other that you sort of need to keep in mind. But at the end of the day, it's just something that's happening in the background, and you just kind of are taken on the rails as you explore the story. Another element is this game is terrifying. I mean, did I mention that it's kind of a post-apocalyptic horror game as well? There's a lot of just hand-down scary shit in this game, okay? So many times where I would just be jump scared by a random mutant jumping around a corner or just ball busting me out of nowhere. So many of those things will happen when you are just playing Metro 2033. It makes for a fun experience. Again, very immersive. You genuinely feel like you're stuck in the Metro in Moscow. It's not the most fun place in the world, but it's a place. I kind of think it is, at least. Again, Metro 2033 is really a peak game for its time frame. It's kind of hard to explain why, but it's mostly because it is a post-apocalyptic world, which we have a lot of those, but there's not a lot of games that do it really well and do it with an interesting plot, story, and characters. And you have a lot of really good characters here, especially if you play the other games like Last Light, which is the next game, and Metro Exodus. Like, they all connect really well to each other, and I do like the story that's there, and they kind of iterate on different mechanics and things along those lines. But if you wanted like a full-on, just straight-up immersive, post-apocalyptic game, this was it. This is a hardcore game that is difficult, it is fun, and it has like a survival aspect to it. Even though it's on the rails and it's mostly a story game, there is an element of like survival to it, which I think is what makes it so much fun, especially if you play the original version, which it's kind of impossible to even get at this point. It's not really easy to find it unless you use some sketchy websites, if you know what I mean. But point is, I definitely think Metro 2033 is just one of the peak games of 2010. A game that genuinely was amazing and also put Ukraine like further on the map for making amazing video games alongside studios like GSC who make, Stalker. So I think this is just another one of those beautiful post-apocalyptic games that just need more credit. I feel like people forget about Metro because it is one of those like games that there is definitely a fan base, but because there hasn't been a game in like a half a decade plus, just people haven't really paid attention to it as much. But hey, with this video, maybe I'll encourage you to go and buy Metro 2033 and play that shit, because I think the game is still fantastic. Even the Redux version is still fantastic, especially for, again, its time. 2010, this was a decade and a half ago this came out. This game is still fun to play, and the story is still really good, and it just encourages you to want to play more of the other games to understand what happens next. So all right, that's my thoughts on, that's my little review of Metro 2033. All right, back to the guy who kidnapped me and forced me to do this. All right, well, that's that. I'm gonna go now.
Did you know? Metro 2033 is actually a rather faithful adaptation of the novel it's based upon, with the original author being directly involved in the game's development.
And lastly, on March 23rd, Avalanche Studios' Just Cause 2 released, a game that took open world chaos to exhilarating new heights. Set on the sprawling island nation of Panau, players once again assumed the role of Rico Rodriguez, whose grappling hook and parachute enabled creative movement and explosive stunts.
Have you ever wanted to commit terrorism in a foreign country while working for the CIA? Don't answer that. I know you're gonna say yes. Just Cause 2, Far Cry's third-person stepbrother where you play as a man named Rico, whose goal is to... I don't actually know. While the game does technically have a storyline, nobody really cares about it, because why would I waste my time with politics when I can instead commit various acts of terrorism? We are working for the CIA after all. Maybe the most important story piece is in the first 5 seconds of dialogue where we hear that we can basically do whatever we want.
It's agency territory, right? US friendly.
Not anymore.
And if we actually look into the story, that's essentially it. This is Panau, and we came here to destabilize the government, but that will not stop me from murdering basically anyone I see because there aren't even consequences. I murdered many innocent people on an island, and my punishment was having some brain-dead soldiers sent after me on boats. From the looks of it, I don't think the government was really stable to begin with. They are led by Bling Bling Boy. And unlike other lame games that rely on realism, or at least somewhat cling on to reality, in Just Cause 2, we play as a man who fears nothing and walks straight into gunfire because 90% of the time, he's completely... And that comparison honestly isn't so far off, considering how, at times, Rico can just... fly? We also carry around a grappling hook that is the sole reason I would beg my brother to let me play this game when I was 8. This grappling hook is basically the entire game. You can latch onto anything with it, and apparently Rico trusted enough to hang and swing around a helicopter from hundreds of feet in the air. Playing this game feels like if you turned a Michael Bay movie into an open world game. Don't believe me? Let me give you a rundown on what I accomplished in a mere 45 minutes of gameplay. While conquering a nuclear power plant with a terrorist group, I blew up a tank with a bazooka. I then stole a helicopter and flew it into a blimp strip club called the Mile High Club, where I murdered many people. I then left and went to the ground where I found a car and had a high-speed chase shootout while headed to a military base. Upon my arrival, I hitched a ride on the back of a fighter jet before being thrown off. So I parachuted back to the base where I stole a fighter jet and left the base while performing evasive maneuvers to avoid anti-air missiles. I then destroyed a cargo ship and an oil rig before flying into another military base where I stole another fighter jet. I accidentally blew it up, so I decided to steal another jet. After deciding this jet looked worthy to fly into space, I attempted to fly it into space. After that didn't work, I flew down to a city where I committed heinous crimes before accidentally flying into a building and dying. Just Cause 2, while not being a perfect game by any means, and honestly not even being that objectively great, still managed to cement itself into the heart of 2010 gamers. It's not a game you play to be immersed. It's not a game you play for the story elements. It's not even a game you play for the well-polished mechanics, because it has none of these things. Instead, it's a game you play to laugh at its absurdity. A game where you can do pretty much anything you want.
Did you know? Just Cause 2's Islands of Panau span over 1,000 square kilometers, making it one of the largest open worlds ever created. Trust me, I would know.
March reinforces 2010's narrative of innovation and scale, whether diving into mythological vengeance, tactical warfare, post-apocalyptic survival, or unfiltered chaos. Players had no shortage of memorable adventures to choose from. April would keep the momentum rolling with its own lineup of fan favorites and surprises. April delivered a versatile batch of titles that highlighted both innovation and refinement, ranging from thoughtful reinventions to new experiments that found their own devoted followings. On April 13th, Ubisoft, after years of stealth-heavy gameplay, took the Splinter Cell series in a more action-oriented direction with Conviction. Sam Fisher returned with a more personal mission, navigating a conspiracy tied to his daughter's death.
Hello, this is Camp Xbox, and I'm talking about Splinter Cell Conviction. After a 4-year gap in Splinter Cell games after the hit Double Agent, and the year before that Chaos Theory, which is a stealth masterpiece, Sam Fisher is back and is taking a much more action-styled take on the franchise. Conviction launched in 2010, only on PC and Xbox 360, but has seen various ports over the years. Though acting as a sequel to Double Agent, Conviction takes a much more vengeful tone than the rest of the franchise. Recently, Sam Fisher's daughter has been killed in a hit and run, and you're on the hunt for her killers. From here, you go across the globe, getting double-crossed by people you trust, and also finding answers to your daughter's death, which may or may not have happened. The way the story is displayed is one of my favorite aspects of this game. Words are painted on the walls of places you explore, or through old grainy film running on objects in the background to display key pieces of information. It's a nice way to tell a story and deliver information to you without pausing the game for a bunch of cutscenes. All of this wouldn't work if it wasn't for the work of Michael Ironside, the voice of Sam Fisher, whose gruff voice adds so much to the character.
You're lying. She's dead. Lambert told me she was dead, and I take his word over yours.
She's alive, Sam, and I know where she is. I've known all along.
Everyone else is excellent here too, and I think it all adds up to make for a nice, thrilling revenge plot akin to movies like Taken, which were so popular when this was released. And that does seep down into the gameplay as well. It does make this game a black sheep in this series, but I wouldn't say it's bad. If anything, that makes this game stand out as completely different and still fun. The stealth elements are light, reminding me of the same turn Hitman did with Absolution in this era. Its focus is on third-person shooter gameplay. You'll hide behind cover, shoot bad guys, but you can also pre-plan your shots if you've taken someone down stealthily. This makes shooting quick and keeps you stealthy in a pinch. I think the shooting feels good and it's fast-paced. There's also environmental kills, which just makes me feel like this took even more notes from Hitman, which I don't think is a bad deal. Stealth is here, but gone are the days of hardcore stealth. You don't worry about light levels. All you need to know is if you're in the dark. If you're in the dark, no one's gonna see you, the screen's gonna turn black and white, and you're solid. Just stay in the shadows, take guys out, and just move on. I do think I enjoy the slower paced hardcore stealth of the older Splinter Cells more, but the fast stealth is still fun. It gives this one a grittier edge that has you bombarding or rushing into enemies. It has this fast moving style mixed with tight controls that makes it entertaining the whole time. What helps is the game's environments. It's set in populated areas like a carnival or downtowns. These areas are bustling and full of life. Not only that, but it's just populated in detail. There are small touches everywhere and the game feels dense because of this. I think the fun of this game is just sneaking around in these realistic areas, planning your next moves. The game as a whole looks fantastic on the 360, with a solid darker look for the series. When it gets into the last chapters, it feels like a slice of late 2000s espionage thriller or revenge flick. It has this action movie quality that I admire. Different to the rest of the series, and unfortunately one of its weakest entries, I do think it still has a ton of merit, especially when it all comes together in the finale to make for something explosive. Throw in an awesome online co-op mode which has its own story and missions, and you'll have a blast. It works as a nice throwback to an era when games were trying to match each other with visceral action, but Conviction still does a good job of retaining its own identity, still having fun stealth, and an awesome story to follow. This one is backwards compatible on all new Xbox consoles, so if you're interested, I definitely recommend checking this one out. It's a lot of fun.
Did you know? Conviction was originally meant to feature a homeless Sam Fisher, hiding in crowds and making makeshift weapons, but this version was scrapped because it didn't feel like a real Splinter Cell game.
April 15 saw EA release another instant classic. Skate 3 leaned into the community and creativity, evolving the formula that had already distinguished the franchise from traditional arcade-style skateboarding games. Players could now build skate parks, form teams, and share content online, turning the game into more of a platform for expression than just a single-player experience.
Few games encapsulate this time period quite like Skate 3, but for those familiar with the series, you'll know that Skate 3 was in so many ways a massive departure from the series' usual themes and art style. The first two Skate games were grungy and focused on immersive skate sim elements that few games tried in years prior, but in retrospect, it was exactly the kind of game to rival the titan that was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Trading single-button tricks for a complex flick-it system, mimicking the movements of the board on your sticks, allowed Skate to be more appealing for those wanting a more realistic experience. So, explain this. Sure, Skate was never hyper-realistic, but a skater made entirely out of meat or a megapark built into the side of a college campus is easily the farthest the series has strayed away from reality. With that said, when it comes to realism, Skate 3 was also the most realistic in a lot of ways. Its clear accessibility was a big goal for EA, evidenced by the cleaner art style, the wider ranges of skating terrain, and the bigger focus on the online community support. This push for reaching a broader audience likely influenced the decision to introduce an easy mode. This mode made bailing a lot harder, gaining speed easier, and it allowed your tricks to send you higher into the air. You also couldn't bail when flipping, as the game would auto-correct any mistakes. There was still plenty of challenge, but it allowed players to focus entirely on learning the tricks and not worrying about other complications like momentum, form, and timing. But what about the fans of the first two games? There aren't a ton of new tricks to learn here, so thankfully, we saw the introduction of Realism Mode. This mode took out any hand-holding. If you want to perform a trick, you need to follow through the whole way or else you won't get enough height. Flips require more precision, momentum is harder to gain, and grinding on rails is the hardest it's ever been, as the game removes the admittedly small magnetism present in easy and normal difficulty. From a game design perspective, it's amazing, because it makes a game harder without simply raising the score requirements on challenges, and for an experienced player like myself, it was a completely new way to play. While we're on the topic of differences, you'll notice that the game doesn't feature an interconnected map like the first games, instead opting for 3 different districts with their own themes. These areas, despite missing some of the magic of having a central location, provide some great spots for players to explore, and the challenges presented still satisfy. I'll admit that the new UI, especially when doing photo ops, isn't as charming as the first game, but when we see this game as a skating utopia, the slick nature makes some more sense. The story and progression of Skate 3 is almost identical to the first 2 games, as it sees you doing challenges to make a name for yourself, except instead of ending up on the cover of Thrasher, you're growing a brand, with each completed challenge resulting in more sales. Rewards are streamlined, with cosmetics being unlocked in a linear fashion rather than opting for paying you cash and letting you buy whatever you want, which is fine, but the real benefit of progressing is unlocking parts to build in your own park. Creating parks in Skate 3 makes it, regardless of how you feel about the art style, the themes, the tricks, absolutely timeless. I still play this game to this day because building parks is only limited by your imagination. I enjoyed finding a spot in the world and skating it over and over again, but being able to make my own spots and tweak it to my specifications is so satisfying, especially when you can share it online. Skate 3 introduced so many ways for the community to connect more. You can join clans, share photos, videos, parks, and I spent so much time both as a kid and as an adult browsing the latest parks and seeing what the community is getting up to. I know that this game had a resurgence a few years after launch due to how absolutely broken it is, and I'm gonna get controversial when I say that, yes, this is one of the more buggy games I've played, but in this case, the glitches are so funny that it's the best case for it being a feature and not a bug. I'm not seriously saying these glitches are good design, but that they are fun regardless, and I wouldn't want them to be fixed. But truly, for as good as the glitches are for content, the mechanics are where Skate 3 shines the most, because there are so many ways to traverse the many obstacles in front of you that it's not uncommon to approach a spot, set a marker, and approach it 50 different times over half an hour. Because you can use different grinds, different tricks, less speed, more speed, and that freedom of expression is the special sauce that creates one of the most timeless and replayable games I've ever played. There's way too much that Skate 3 and the Skate series as a whole does right to fit into this segment. So if you want to see more, learn more about the series, and hear my thoughts on the rest of the series, I'll have a video on my channel discussing it all. Skate 3 is one of my favorite games of all time, and I think it's going to occupy my top 5 for a long time. Thank you for having me on, Zany, and sorry to everyone else who's covering deeply inferior games in this video.
Did you know? Skate 3 City was originally planned to be even larger, which was meant to include more rural areas and unfinished construction zones.
Initially overlooked by many, Kavia's Nier would go on to earn cult status thanks to its deeply emotional story, experimental gameplay structure, and haunting soundtrack. Players followed the journey of a father searching for a cure for his daughter's illness in a broken, melancholic world.
Nier, a hack-and-slash adventure game that is in the same universe as the Drakengard games. And believe it or not, when this game first came out over here, it didn't get the greatest reviews, but it was kept alive due to a cult status, which is why we got the second game, Nier Automata, and that one got a lot more press. So anyways, let's just get talking about the story. So it takes place in the future where everything is destroyed, but civilization is slowly rebuilding. And the main character, who shall we call Papa Nier, has a daughter and she ends up getting kidnapped. So he has to go on an adventure and try to rescue her. And along the way he ends up meeting some very interesting characters, and that's pretty much the basics of what you need to know. But of course, let's talk a little bit about 2 characters that I really love in this game. So there's Grimoire Weiss, a flying book that talks, and he happens to have a sassy attitude, and he is voiced by Liam O'Brien, and I absolutely love it. And the other is Kane, who is a female character who happens to have a tragic backstory, and she happens to cuss like a sailor. Of course, there is a lot more to these characters, and there's plenty of other ones, but we're on a time limit here. But I will end off the character section by saying that their dialogue is just so fun. Yeah, the 3 of these characters have some very interesting dynamic between each other, and it just never gets old. And as for the graphics, while it is a little bit dated in some aspects, it does make up for it with its good art direction. For that, the character designs and monster designs are all really good, and I like them. And there are some sceneries that are pretty iconic looking and I love the look of, but I do think that some of the texture graphics with some backgrounds are the ones that do look a little bit dated and look more like a PS2 game than a PS3 or 360 game. But it doesn't bother me personally, but it's something that is worth noting. And as for the game's music, there's a lot to say about it, but man, it is just so fantastic. It has this very epic, adventurous vibes with a lot of singing in it, and the singing is actually done in its own made-up language for the game, which I think is really awesome. It reminds me a lot of another game I really love, being Art Tonelico on PS2, and there's a lot of variety within it as well. Now, I don't want to be here for hours, but I will just say that, yeah, the music in this game is well worth listening to. Even if you've never played the game before, it is just so great. And as for the game's controls, now this is the part that's going to be very mixed with people, and it's even mixed with me too, is that the controls in this game are a bit more on the stiffer side, where the attacking feels a bit more stiff, and the dodging is a bit more on the floaty side. Now, I wouldn't go as far to say that they are bad controls, because I don't think that the stiffness is super terrible. Like, sure, it is very different feeling compared to games like Devil May Cry 4 or even Dynasty Warriors 7, but the more you stick with the game, the more you do get used to it, and it doesn't become too much of an issue. But it is something that is very important to note when it comes to playing this version of the game. But if you do compare this game to some of the older ones in the series, like the Drakengard games on PS2, or hell, even Drakengard 3, which came a little bit after, yeah, this game feels a lot better compared to those. So the game's controls, they're not perfect by any means, but they were a decent stepping stone compared to what they were able to do before. So overall, I would say that Nier is a game that I do really like a lot, but it's not a game that will appeal to everyone, especially during the masses of that time. But the fact that this game did get enough popularity and a cult status to the point where they actually made a sequel to it, which really shows you that, yeah, people knew that this game had a lot of heart and charm to it. If anything, the game is not forgettable at all, as it has a lot of stuff going on for it that does make it stand out, especially for a game that came out 2010.
Did you know? Nier was released in 2 different versions, with one being entirely exclusive to Japan. The Western version of the game features an old protagonist, as Square Enix believed that they would prefer it.
On April 27th, Capcom's Super Street Fighter IV refined the series' already excellent Street Fighter IV with new characters, rebalanced mechanics, and polished online play. It added 10 fighters to the roster, including fan favorites like T-Hawk and DJ, while also improving the game's pacing and accessibility. The result was a robust package that solidified Street Fighter IV's status as the king of modern 2D fighters. Competitive players praised the fine-tuning of mechanics, while casual fans appreciated the approachable controls and vibrant presentation. Super Street Fighter IV wasn't just an update, it was a full-fledged enhancement that extended the life of one of the fighting genre's biggest comebacks. One day later, Lost Planet 2 expanded its predecessor's universe with bigger maps, 4-player co-op, and heavier emphasis on team-based objectives. Set across various biomes of the planet Eden 3, the game introduced massive boss battles and more customizable characters. While it retained the series' signature grappling and mech-based combat, the shift toward multiplayer-focused gameplay was a mixed bag for fans expecting a stronger narrative experience. Despite its sometimes uneven tone and steep learning curve, Lost Planet 2 delivered intense, often chaotic combat encounters that could be thrilling with a coordinated team. Its blend of sci-fi spectacle and tactical co-op found a niche audience, even if it struggled to find mainstream acclaim. On the same day, developed for the PlayStation Portable, Konami's Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker was anything but a scaled-down spin-off. Hideo Kojima delivered a full-fledged narrative experience that expanded Big Boss's story and set the groundwork for Metal Gear Solid 5.
One of the most overlooked games of 2010 was easily Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. MGS Peace Walker was the 7th mainline installment of the Metal Gear franchise that was developed and published by Konami in April of 2010, originally being released exclusively for the PlayStation Portable, but later being re-released on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 with an HD port from Bluepoint Games, which is the version that I'm using in my footage here. And while it's no easy task to try to fit a review of a Metal Gear game into less than 10 minutes, I'm pretty sure I'm the only guy Zany could find who's brave enough to even try, so we're just gonna go for it and see how we can do. Peace Walker is set in Costa Rica in the year 1974, placing it 10 years after the events of Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. The game's story serves as a direct sequel to Metal Gear Solid 3, with players once again getting to play as Big Boss, and many of the characters and events from MGS3 being critical to understanding the story of Peace Walker. If you're a fan of Metal Gear's unique brand of storytelling, or just have a general fascination with Cold War era stories, then Peace Walkers will certainly be right up your alley. It's got some incredible writing that knows how to blend its intrigue, comedy, and emotional moments near perfectly, is portrayed through these stunning hand-drawn cutscenes, and serves as the direct setup to a certain Metal Gear title that I'm sure a lot of you out there have played. And while the story is truly great here, it's not the reason that I recommend that people play Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. No, my friends, the reason that I urge all of you to play Peace Walker is for its gameplay. Its core gameplay mechanics are shockingly good for a PSP title, with all of the trademark shooting, stealth, and even CQC mechanics of the Metal Gear franchise being translated over here in a way that's frankly mind-blowing considering the hardware this was released on. The controls are a bit janky at times, and definitely don't have that smoothness of something like MGS3 or MGS4, but considering that it was made to be played on one of these things, it's hard to really fault them for that. And in spite of some rougher controls and some really stupid enemy AI, the stealth is still overwhelmingly satisfying here, just like it is in all the other Metal Gear games. But what really makes Peace Walker stand out from the rest of the series so much is its general structure. See, instead of slowly exploring a large series of levels that are all stitched together seamlessly and give an almost semi-open world feeling to the game, here in Peace Walker, we get a set of missions that can be selected from the menu. Here, there are story missions that will take you through the main story of the game, as well as a variety of side missions that will give the player all sorts of cool rewards for completing them. Each of these missions are typically around 5 to 10 minutes long a piece, making them the perfect length for some quick gaming sessions on a handheld system. And the rewards you get by completing them tie directly into Peace Walker's bold new base management mechanics. At the beginning of the game, players are granted access to a small offshore base of their own called Mother Base, and are told that Big Boss can use this base to build up his own private army. So while you're out completing missions, anytime you knock out an enemy soldier, you can use the new Fulton recovery system to send them back to base for recruitment. And after they've been reconditioned, they can be assigned to a variety of teams around the base, like your combat team, your research and development team, your medical team, you get the idea. Each of these individual teams will then offer their own unique contributions to your overall progression. You can send members of your combat team out on their own missions to collect rewards for you passively as you play. Your research and development team can produce all new weapons and items for you that you didn't have access to previously, and so much more. So the general gameplay loop here is that you do a bit of management back at Mother Base to unlock some new gear, then go out and use that gear for a few minutes on a mission to gather resources and recruit more soldiers, then come back to base to spend those resources you just got on new gear before doing the whole thing over and over again. It's an incredibly addictive loop, and one that I often fall into for hours at a time whenever I decide to pick the game back up. And I haven't even mentioned a ton of the smaller things that just make this game so much cooler than it already is, like how the entire game is playable in co-op with a friend, or how when battling against armored vehicles or attack helicopters, you can choose to tackle these fights non-lethally for a chance to capture that vehicle and add it to your own private army. There are so many cool little details and nuances that just simply can't fit into a video like this, but that all add up to making this game an amazing product. And that's not even mentioning how many awesome pieces of content there are for you to dive into after you've completed the main story. You could of course just stop playing the game once the main story ends, but then how would you get the chance to build your own functional Metal Gear to send out on missions? Or how would you find that secret Monster Hunter crossover that lets you fight iconic monsters from that franchise as Metal Gear's big boss? And most importantly, how would you achieve the true second ending of the game that actually sets things up for the inevitable Metal Gear Solid 5? There's just so much packed into this little PSP title, and you could easily sink close to 100 hours into it without even seeing everything that it has to offer. So if anything that I talked about here stood out to you, I would seriously urge you to give Peace Walker a look. It's easily one of my favorite games that I've found during my time trying out new stuff for my YouTube channel, and one that I've recommended to personal friends of mine time and time again since I first played it. If you just want to play through it for the story and then be done, that's perfectly fine, but if you find yourself wanting more once the credits roll, then luckily for you, you've only just barely scratched the surface. And before I leave, I want to give a huge thank you to Zany for reaching out to me about this video. It's an awesome project that can't have been easy to put together, so definitely show him some love for doing so. I'll hope to see some of you guys swing by my channel and say hi sometime, but with that said, thank you all for listening, and I'll hand things back over to Zany now.
Did you know? Peace Walker pushed the PlayStation Portable's hardware to its absolute limits, having fully motion captured cutscenes, deep base building mechanics, and both multiplayer and versus mode.
April proved that not every major release needed to dominate sales charts in order to leave a lasting mark. From risk-taking RPGs and refined fighters to reinventions of legacy franchises, the month offered a rich snapshot of gaming's growing variety and ambition, and May promised even more surprises just around the corner. May delivered a powerhouse lineup of games, mixing blockbuster adventures with inventive design and bold narrative experiments, with multiple major releases sharing the same week. As on the 18th, Remedy Entertainment's Alan Wake released, a psychological thriller that blurred the lines between video games and episodic television. Players assumed the role of a troubled writer caught in a supernatural mystery in the eerie town of Bright Falls. With its moody atmosphere, flashlight-based combat, and episodic structure, the game delivered a gripping narrative experience unlike anything else at the time. Its storytelling and presentation drew comparisons to Twin Peaks and The Twilight Zone, and while the gameplay loop was somewhat repetitive, the strong writing and haunting visuals made Alan Wake a cult favorite. Its influence would continue to grow over the years, eventually earning a sequel more than a decade later. On the same day, Prince of Persia: The Forgotten Sands released. A return to the beloved Sands of Time continuity. The Forgotten Sands sought to recapture the magic of the original trilogy, combining time manipulation mechanics with classic acrobatic platforming and sword-based combat. It provided a familiar yet satisfying experience for longtime fans of the series. Though it didn't revolutionize the franchise, The Forgotten Sands was a solid and polished entry that balanced nostalgia with updated mechanics. Its release alongside the Prince of Persia film, however mediocre it was, helped renew interest in the franchise, even if it didn't push it in any bold new direction. And last but definitely not least on the 18th, Rockstar's Red Dead Redemption released. Blending cinematic presentation with dynamic gameplay, the game delivered thrilling shootouts, horse-riding exploration, and a living, breathing world. Its ending remains one of the most talked about in video game history, and the title is still considered one of the greatest games of all time.
Oh, what's happening, fuckers? Please take a seat, and stay still. I think this stuff's making me blind. Anyway, you may be wondering why I'm in an old Timmy saloon. Well, I came to this town on a mission, to catch a wanted outlaw. But I got a little distracted, by the poker table, by learning the art of five-finger fillet, and by showing off my gun skills. Spoiler, no one was impressed. Anyway, since we're here, and with the help of this antique, let's take a look at Red Dead Redemption, a game often overshadowed by its prequel, and see if it still holds up 15 years later. So, let's get into it. Successor to 2004's cult classic, Red Dead Revolver. Red Dead Redemption is an open-world title, offering a mix of quality gunplay, intense Wild West action, and more Wilhelm screams than anyone can handle. In this game, set in 1911, during the last days of the Old West and the American frontier, you play as former outlaw, John Marston, as he hunts the members of his old gang, while trying not to mention his family for 5 seconds. Along the way you meet many colourful characters, which include the federal government, God's most sober Irishman, and who could forget, average TikTok live salesman. While sharing similarities with other Rockstar-developed games of the period, offering cover shooting mechanics that were very much the style at the time, Red Dead does more than enough to ensure it's not just GTA with horses, while offering an array of apparently period-appropriate weapons, including pistols and revolvers, rifles and shotguns, and various throwable items. What really sets Red Dead Redemption apart is the Deadeye mechanic, which allows you to target various body parts on enemies, or target multiple enemies at once. And trust me, you can do some really goofy shit with it. As should be expected from Rockstar Games, what with the endless crunch during production, Red Dead does a great job offering both engaging gameplay and impressive depth of content. The gunplay feels fantastic, and manages to provide an interesting experience, one that feels like one part Old West stunt show, and one part most brutal live-leak video you've ever seen. The various weapons feel great to use, whether on foot or on horseback, and offer shooting with a satisfying weight. However, special credit must go to the lasso, if only because of the dark shit you can do with it. As mentioned, Red Dead offers a solid variety of side content, both in terms of conventional side quests and various mini-games and collectibles, all which offer an enjoyable change of pace from the game's story missions. The game offers a variety of animals for the player to hunt and skin for meat and pelt, even if it doesn't go far enough for some apparently. It also offers multiple forms of gambling, which I definitely enjoyed, and was never upset by. And thankfully, unlike other Rockstar titles, nobody is harassing you to go bowling, because mobile phones hadn't been invented yet.
Hello? Nico, it's Roman. Let's go bowling.
I don't understand it, old boy. Honest to goodness.
I don't have much bad to say about Red Dead itself, without it just turning into a rant about the PC remaster released last year, and how much of a reasonably priced, high quality, well-made remaster that it is. The movement can be a bit wonky, especially when traversing narrow spaces, though thankfully it doesn't attempt platforming enough to be a huge issue. My other major issue are the missions set in Mexico. While not absolutely awful, the quality noticeably drops in Mexico, a shame considering the quality of the rest of the story. Beyond this, the PC version suffers from minor technical issues, which probably annoy me way more than they should, a result of being charged full price for a port of a 15-year-old game. These issues include an often stuttering frame rate, NPCs occasionally popping out of existence, or what happens when you look at a train track the wrong way. And I'm not sure if this is specific to the PC version, but the NPCs in this game are thick as pig shit. This is best exemplified by this guy, who didn't seem bothered about being given the Alec Baldwin treatment. Maybe he just wants it to happen.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine. You just can't get it.
While playing the high-resolution PC version may skew my judgment somewhat, in terms of its presentation, Red Dead Redemption is a game that I think still holds up quite well, even after 15 long years. The game's map offers a decent variety of unique and interesting locations, each of which manage to feel distinct and well-detailed, while avoiding the overly muddy graphical styling common to the period. The character models also hold up well, feeling quite expressive for the time, while also offering a solid level of detail, even when they occasionally glitch during a cutscene or two. Additionally, Red Dead's soundtrack is probably its greatest asset. The soundtrack draws heavy influence from the scores of iconic spaghetti westerns, specifically the work of Ennio Morricone, on classic movies such as A Fistful of Dollars, and The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Composed by Bill Elm and Woody Jackson, Red Dead's score takes a somewhat minimalist approach, yet provides high-quality music with solid variety. It's also notable amongst Rockstar titles for its lack of licensed music, since car radios wouldn't exist for about another decade, and no one ever thought to strap a radio to a horse. In conclusion, Red Dead Redemption is a title that holds up fantastically well, even after all these years. Even if I moan about the PC version, I can't deny that Red Dead is a thoroughly enjoyable title, with enough satisfying content to keep the player engaged for a long time. And that's without even mentioning the highly rated zombie-based DLC, Undead Nightmare. So without a doubt, I would definitely recommend Red Dead Redemption to anyone. Anyway, I'll be off now. We should probably get looking for that outlaw. He must be around this town here somewhere. Are you doing all right there, mate? Get bored of all the cowboy stuff, and fancy a few swigs from the old bottle? Well, I wouldn't worry too much. I'm certain the next one will be much better. Anyway, you rest well now. Nighty-night.
Did you know? Red Dead Redemption's Dead-Eye targeting system was inspired by gunfights from classic Western movies like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
On the 21st, we got another rebuttal to Mario Kart. This time developed by Sony and going by the name of Mod Nation Racers. The game put a heavy emphasis on customization. Players could design their own racers, karts and tracks using robust tools, and then share their creations online. With its approachable gameplay and vibrant art style, it stood out as a family-friendly racer with a creative twist. While the load times and difficulty spikes drew some criticism, the game's play, create, share philosophy mirrored the appeal of Little Big Planet, making it a hit with players who love to tinker and create. May 23rd, we got the direct sequel to one of the Wii's most acclaimed titles. Super Mario Galaxy 2 took everything great about its predecessor and refined it to near perfection. With tighter level design, new power-ups, and the return of Yoshi, it delivered inventive platforming challenges that felt both fresh and familiar. The game's creativity was unmatched, with gravity-defying puzzles and whimsical environments that continually surprised players. Galaxy 2 proved that even in a well-worn franchise, Nintendo could still deliver magic, solidifying its place as one of the best 3D platformers ever made. And lastly, on May 28th, Obsidian Entertainment's Alpha Protocol was an ambitious attempt to create a spy-themed RPG where players' choice truly mattered. Taking on the role of Special Agent Michael Thornton, players could approach missions through stealth, combat, or diplomacy, with branching dialogue and consequences that rippled throughout the game.
Alpha Protocol, developed by Obsidian Entertainment, is one of the most fascinating train wrecks in gaming.
It's broken, unpolished, and often hilariously bad. But somehow, it still manages to be one of the most unique RPGs ever made. Let's start with the gameplay, because Alpha Protocol feels like an early alpha build that somehow got greenlit at full release. The gunplay is floaty and unsatisfying, like you're firing nerf darts at enemies who may or may not decide to react. The aiming style is wildly inconsistent. Sometimes you'll perfectly line up a shot and miss for no reason, other times you'll land a headshot by accident. It's the kind of design that makes you wonder if the game is actively trying to stop you from having fun. The cover system is just as janky. Snapping in and out of cover is awkward, unreliable, and often leaves you more exposed than protected. Then there's the AI, which deserves its own trophy for sheer incompetence. Enemies regularly run in circles, get stuck on geometry, or stare blankly at walls while you reload in front of them. Sometimes they'll forget you exist mid-fight.
To bend the wind.
Sometimes they'll rush you in a single file line like it's a school trip. It's really, really bad, but in a way that can loop back around to being quite funny. There's a certain charm to how completely busted it is, like watching a bootleg Sky movie acted out by malfunctioning robots. It's frustrating, sure, but it's also oddly entertaining, and because the gameplay is so bland, it's often the most enjoyable part about actually playing the game. Alpha Protocol is the rare game where the brokenness becomes part of the experience. The bugs are everywhere. The camera breaks, AI break, objectives break, cover breaks, everything breaks. This just isn't rough around the edges, it's jagged from every possible angle. And yet, you can't stop playing. Visually, the environments in Alpha Protocol are bland, repetitive, and largely devoid of any personality. You'll see the same sterile hallways, generic office buildings, dimly lit bunkers, and cookie-cutter safe houses recycled across missions. There's very little in the way of visual storytelling or atmosphere, the kind that helps immerse you in a location or makes a level feel alive. Every area feels like it was built just to be passed through, not to be explored or remembered. The world design does the bare minimum, and while that might have been the limitation of the time or budget, it definitely hurts immersion. But let's be honest, no one is playing Alpha Protocol for cutting-edge visuals or stunning levels. You're here for the chaos, the characters, and the choices. You're here for the writing, and this is where Alpha Protocol shines. It's Obsidian after all, so it's no surprise that narrative and character work are solid. The cast is diverse, memorable, and well written. And while the relationship system is fairly basic, it's well executed, and more importantly, real. Just because someone is your love interest doesn't mean they're safe. Characters can die, alliances can collapse, the game doesn't coddle you. Your choices really do matter. And speaking of choices, the dialogue system deserves special praise. Protagonist Michael Thornton can be played as a suave James Bond style charmer, a professional Boy Scout, or a completely unhinged sociopath. The choices aren't just cosmetic, they influence the story, dialogue, and even which missions are available. The branching paths in Alpha Protocol put a lot of modern RPGs to shame. Tone in the espionage genre I feel like leans one of two ways. You have the more serious takes like Splinter Cell, TV shows like The Americas and Homeland, and then you have the more lighthearted like the Mission Impossible franchise and TV shows like Chuck, and that's definitely where I feel like Alpha Protocol's inspiration aligns. The tongue-in-cheek dialogue, Thornton's often very relaxed attitude when things couldn't be going any worse, and also, you can get an achievement for completing the entire game without hooking up with anyone. That's the sort of game that this is. Alpha Protocol is a disaster, but it's a beautiful, ambitious disaster. Beneath the broken mechanics and outdated visuals lies one of the most daring RPGs of its time. It's the kind of game that should have been great, and somehow, despite everything, it still kind of is. If you can laugh through the bugs and survive the gameplay, you'll find a game that actually respects your choices and doesn't hold your hand. Modern gaming has a problem with every game trying to appeal to everyone. Alpha Protocol is most definitely not for everyone, and that's okay. But if you want something different, and you're okay with the jank, it's an experience you definitely won't forget anytime soon. Give some love to Zany for writing this script for me. He wrote an entire script based on my basic notes that I had from playing the game because I didn't actually end up having enough time to do this because I'm a bad friend. So he deserves all the love and all the praise for this.
Did you know? Alpha Protocol was originally meant to be an action-heavy shooter before Obsidian pushed for a more RPG-centered approach.
With one of the strongest months of the year so far, May showcased the full breadth of what games could be, from cowboy epics and whimsical platformers to eerie thrillers and player-driven spy dramas. But as the summer months approached, the industry was slowed down just a tad. June offered a smaller but still memorable set of releases, each bringing something unique to the table. June 10th we got a game that initially only released in Japan. Xenoblade Chronicles became a symbol of fan-driven localization movements. The game presented a sweeping JRPG narrative set on the backs of two massive titans, with players exploring vast open zones, engaging in real-time combat, and unraveling a philosophical, emotionally resonant story. Its intricate world-building and ambitious scope stood out, even on the aging Wii hardware. Though Western audiences wouldn't officially receive the game until later, its debut in Japan marked the beginning of what would become one of the most beloved RPG franchises of the decade, and as such I still wanted to mention it, even if briefly. High Moon's Transformers War for Cybertron broke the streak of disappointing licensed games with a polished third-person shooter that respected its source material. Set before the events of the original animated series, it portrayed the fall of Cybertron with surprising narrative weight. Players could switch between Autobot and Decepticon campaigns, each featuring fluid transformation mechanics and explosive combat. The game's art direction, voice acting, and multiplayer suite were all praised, appealing to both longtime fans and action game veterans. It proved that licensed titles could be more than cash-ins, earning recognition as one of the best Transformers games ever made. If cute went homicidal was the central pitch of Artificial Mind and Movement's Naughty Bear, a darkly comedic action game that followed the murderous teddy bear exacting revenge on fellow toys who excluded him from a party. While the concept was bold and the tone gleefully twisted, execution left much to be desired. The gameplay loop became repetitive quickly, and technical flaws marred the overall experience. Despite mixed reviews, Naughty Bear gained a modest cult following for its absurd premise and quirky sense of humor. It remains a curiosity from a time when publishers were more willing to take risks on bizarre, mid-budget titles. July is probably the least exciting month so far, but it did offer one major standout indie title that would redefine what small-scale storytelling could achieve. Released as part of Xbox Live's Summer of Arcade, Limbo captivated players with its stark black and white visuals, minimalist design, and emotionally haunting atmosphere. A puzzle platformer without dialogue or explicit storytelling, it relied on environmental cues and unsettling imagery to evoke emotion and tension. Its trial and error gameplay and eerie sound design created a sense of quiet dread, earning critical acclaim and helping to usher in a new wave of indie titles focused on tone, artistry, and ambiguity. Limbo's influence can still be seen in many narrative-driven indie games that followed. So, with these two slow burns out of the way, and with August just around the corner, the year's second half was gearing up for even more instant classics. August brought with it a trio of notable releases that each explored violence and intensity in very different ways. Grimy, chaotic, and deliberately unpolished. IO Interactive's Kane and Lynch 2 Dog Days lean into a gritty aesthetic inspired by found footage cinema and amateur digital recordings. The game followed the unstable duo through the underbelly of Shanghai in a narrative soaked in desperation and brutality.
Lynch! Stop fucking kill you!
I love this game. It has a visual aesthetic that has yet to be reproduced. The developers were going for a camera that appeared as if the scenes were being filmed on a camcorder. The whole shaky view against the backdrop of violence in a rough neighborhood is reminiscent of shock websites of yesteryear. Specifically, it reminds me of LiveLeak, the video sharing platform that housed war footage, cartels doing cartel things, and all sorts of troublesome material. What you could watch on sites like LiveLeak felt illegal to view, and its disturbing subject matter almost made you want to take a shower. That, in essence, is what the atmosphere of Kane and Lynch 2 was going for. No area of the game looks pretty, except maybe the skyscrapers in the distance. But you will never get to those high-rises and see luxury living. No, this game has you battling through sweatshops with tense ambiance as the OST.
I can't express how sometimes this game shifts into almost a horror game with the type of music, I guess, noises, whispering you hear in the background. This savage tone is set up immediately. The intro at the beginning of this segment, that's what you see when you start a new game. The two protagonists getting tortured in front of a camcorder. It's a subversive style that only Kane and Lynch 2 has tried to do, at least in the AAA space. The game was developed by IO Interactive and published by Square Enix, which IO was not a stranger to violent subject matter, as Hitman had 4 games at this point. IO did some pretty untraditional camera work during these cutscenes. Take this view, for example, in this car. It's like the camcorder's on the seat and someone forgot to press stop recording. It is as if we aren't supposed to be listening to this conversation or see this man's face. The added cherry on top is the pixelation of certain gory moments. It's fourth wall breaking in an interesting way. It's as if we're watching these events on a platform where the uploader is pushing the boundaries of the terms of service. They are censoring aspects that may get the video pulled. In general, it's an ugly, unsettling, sometimes disturbing, during certain moments I cannot show. It's something that we saw once and will probably never ever see again. Too bad. The game is absolutely awful, man. I hate this game. The gunplay early on is frustrating due to how inaccurate all the weapons tend to be, except for maybe some handguns. You fire away and you'll maybe hit a limb. You could close the distance and ensure your shot lands, but the camcorder handheld footage style is really counterintuitive and almost nausea-inducing. You're trying to survive and kill the ever-ending supply of enemies, only to not be able to see anything because the screen is wobbling. And it doesn't help that you have several escort moments where you have to protect somebody from the enemies. And let me tell you, they do whatever they want. They're going to move forward regardless of how many enemies you have taken out. So you have to act fast, shoot with some kind of accuracy, but not die. And it's just so frustrating. There is potential for a good game here. And honestly, it's not even one of the worst games of 2010. It's just mediocre enough that most don't care about it, and those who do bring it up usually mention the scene where you're butt naked in the rain, which I can't really show much of. Regardless, there was not this outcry for more games like it, ending not only Kane and Lynch's story, but any chance of another live leak the game kind of thing, right? So yeah, I have a love-hate feeling towards Kane and Lynch 2. I love it enough to get the Russian exclusive collector's edition for PC. For some reason, this thing's sealed. I don't know why I bought this. And I hate it enough that every time I click play, I can feel the bile rising in my throat as I just think about enduring 4 hours of shaky cam. Co-op still works though. And funny enough, I played this game just fine on Linux using Steam Proton. It's better optimized than half the games coming out today. Anyway, I'm gonna go play something else as a palate cleanser.
Did you know? Players can dig into the game files to disable both the shaky cam and compression effects, making the game look much cleaner.
Set against the backdrop of 1940s and 50s America, 2K's Mafia II delivered a cinematic crime drama that stood apart from open-world contemporaries with its focus on narrative and atmosphere. Players stepped into the shoes of Vito Scaletta, a war veteran drawn into organized crime, and followed his rise through a tightly directed, story-driven campaign.
So, I was gonna wear a full, 1950s getup for this, full suit and all, but then I realized that I get enough shit for being a gaming YouTuber. I can't add a fedora to that mix and ever live it down. Fact of the matter is, though, pretending you're a 1950s gangster or detective is kind of any male fantasy, telling toots that these streets aren't what they used to be. I feel like every young male born in the early 2000s has that same fantasy, and I feel like it comes from two main reasons. L.A. Noire, which, came out in 2011, so I can't really talk about it yet, but next year, Zany, I will be petitioning for that. And of course, the game we're talking about today, one of the most long-awaited and anticipated sequels of all time, Mafia II. I feel like it's important to mention Mafia in the context of being a sequel, because unlike a lot of narrative-driven games, Mafia 2 is in itself an entirely complete and self-contained experience. With the 8 years development between the series' first linear-style entry and the second, it saw itself become one of the most unique, groundbreaking open-world experiences of its time. Now, that might sound like some cliche. I'm doing the typical YouTuber hyperbole, saying that something is a massive, underrated gem, or that it's the best best thing that ever happened to the entire world ever, but I promise that's not what I'm doing here. I won't deny that the overwhelming trend in the gaming industry during the 7th generation was making everything a third-person open-world action-adventure game, and it's hard to argue that Mafia II wasn't chasing that trend. But what 2K Czech did with the formula that was being run into the ground was truly incredible. But unfortunately, it might have been slightly overshadowed by a certain Wild West game that came out 6 months prior. Understandably so. What truly draws me to a video game, more than flashy gameplay, at times more than a great story, is the ability to truly let go. To fully fall into the shoes of a different person and a different world. To be utterly immersed in a universe not my own. And I don't think I'm alone in that feeling. It's the reason that Red Dead 2 is so many people's favourite game of all time. It's the reason every Arkham review talks about feeling like Batman. It's the reason Battlefield 1 was beloved, while Call of Duty World War 2 was just another mediocre COD. Absolute immersion is often hard to find, and it feels like it's becoming increasingly hard to find over the last few years. Which becomes baffling when you look back and see that in 2010, this game created a world that felt just as true to life as actually walking the streets of a mid-century city. From the moment our protagonist, Vito Scaletta, gets back from his mandatory service on the front lines, we are flooded with details covering every inch of his snow-laden city. As he talks with old neighbours, reacquaints with his childhood best friend, and takes a drive at the exact speed limit, else risk getting a ticket. The motherly pressure to get a good safe job takes Vito to the docks, and after feeling, in full immersion, the mind-numbing pain of moving boxes from one container to another, we feel the same desire as him to kick this indentured servitude life to make some real money through his Sicilian connections. The authenticity of this desire carries straight over to the authenticity of its consequences, as after only a few missions working his way up the Mafia hierarchy, Vito is caught and imprisoned. Like, actually imprisoned. This isn't just a way to skip time. You go into a completely different playable section that gives the lived experience of managing the delicate power balances behind bars. Even in this seemingly sidelined segment, everyone in the prison reacts to Vito when approached. Groups of prisoners work out, play dice, smoke, talk, and live in this digital world. This feeling of a lived-in world that is present throughout the entire game, of course, isn't quite the level of natural encounters in, say, a Red Dead 2, but what it is the perfect combination of linear mission development with an open-world experience to create an illusion of absolute immersion. Sure, unlike games of today, not every single player is going to have this unique experience, which, by the way, is just marketing talk, but every player that plays Mafia 2 is going to feel the reality of their experience, even if it's not unique to them. And personally, that's far more interesting than 1,000 RNG encounters across a massive empty map. We, as Vito, navigate incarcerated power structures and come to understand the overwhelming power of the mob he's only started getting involved in, and his time in prison feeds into his eventual succession when he returns to an almost entirely new city. Yes, the details like eating, drinking, customization are all flawlessly immersive. Yes, the police and wanted system feels more intentional and authentic than any crime game released since. Yes, the driving system is a perfect encapsulation of the feeling of riding in a 50s Cadillac, with your friend berating you for running red lights and all. Yes, there's collectible Playboy magazines that started a sexual awakening in probably quite a few young men. But what makes Mafia 2 truly unique is the way all of these elements come together, adapting and developing to create the perfect backdrop for the story of Vito Scaletta, a story told over almost a decade, seeing a young war veteran be drawn into the world of organized crime, being forced to sacrifice his personal relationships and values, and eventually being forced to choose between his own personal moral compass and the death oath he makes to his financial family. This backdrop of Empire Bay is alive. You can see the class structure of the city in the run-down, dirty cars of poorer neighbourhoods as opposed to the shiny facade of Greenfield and Midtown. Every moment, whether it be walking down the street or in the middle of a huge mission, is crafted with meticulous detail. Detail so tight it may even go unnoticed, that allows the player to truly get lost in this world. And this feeling is crafted so intentionally in order to feed back into the story, with the dirty, impoverished streets of Little Italy that Vito initially returns to becoming the sunny streets of the wealthy suburbs, the visual epitome of the American dream, only to be burned down and destroyed in an instant. A material palace built on morally corrupt sand. The world as a whole evolves alongside Vito's character, as his enrollment in the Falcone crime family comes with flashier cars, flashier clothes, and cleaner streets, which replaced the down-to-earth, rugged, authentic life he had when his real family's love was all that mattered. What I'm trying to say here is that without its immersion, without the reality of Mafia 2's world being built up, the game as a whole probably falls flat. I mean, the gunplay is clunky, the fighting mechanics are broken, the driving in a vacuum is stiff, there's basically no active side content. It is not a game you play for the riveting gameplay. It's a game you play to lose yourself, to escape completely into a story of heartbreak, of sacrifice, of betrayal, and of salvation. Like other games that fall into similar categories, no one really cares if the gameplay mechanics are shoddy, because sometimes that's not all games are about. Nakey Jakey, that was a direct message to you. Sometimes all you need is to feel like you're in another world. And a decade and a half after its release, there's very few games that create this feeling quite like Mafia 2.
Did you know? Vito's best friend, Joe Barbaro, was initially meant to be the playable character, but the developers decided that Vito's rags to riches story was more compelling.
From the mind of Shinji Mikami, Vanquish, developed by Platinum Games, redefined what a third-person shooter could look and feel like. With high-speed movements, stylish slow-motion mechanics, and a sleek sci-fi aesthetic, the game encouraged aggressive, momentum-driven combat.
Movement in shooters has become a huge talking point in recent years. Players want fast running, jumping, sliding, and general smoothness in their mobility. Even before this craze, we had arena shooters that also featured quick and fluid movement. However, there was one game that wasn't the most well known, but became a cult classic for providing something more than just taking cover. This being Vanquish. Developed by Platinum Games and published by Sega, Vanquish is a third-person shooter that was released for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 on October 19, 2010. It would later be ported to PC in 2017, with its PS4 and Xbox One versions releasing in 2020. You play as Sam Gideon, who is assisting the US Marines in taking down Viktor Zaitsev. Viktor is part of the Order of the Russian Star, which stole a space colony from the US and used its solar energy to destroy San Francisco. The Marines are sent to take him down before he destroys New York City. The story is nothing special, with a pretty typical plotline and decent voice acting. In terms of the game's presentation, it's an interesting mix of a sci-fi but also grungy aesthetic. You have a high-tech suit, using advanced weapons and fighting many robotic enemies on a huge, war-torn space civilization. While the game may have aged graphically, I would say this was pretty decent looking back on release. The environments look awesome and are varied throughout. There are a lot of effects like debris, sparks, and explosions that help to add detail. The original soundtrack and sound design is also done pretty well. When we get into the gameplay, this is where Vanquish really starts to shine. To start off, there's a good amount of weapons consisting of machine guns, an assault rifle, a shotgun, a laser, rockets, grenades, and more. There are also melee attacks, and there are some quick time events thrown in. In terms of movement, there is no running, jumping, or wall running. Instead, you can dodge roll, slide around, fly out of cover, and perform a flip when kicking off of objects or enemies. When aiming down sights in many of these moves, it will slow down time. When at low health, the game will force you into slow motion to give you a fighting chance. The suit can overheat when using too much of its power, which takes away melee, much of your movement, and all of your slow motion abilities. While Vanquish may not have the typical movement abilities we see in modern games, it's still very fun. It strikes a nice balance of using cover and movement together. Plus, there is a lot of depth here once you start to master its mechanics. It's an experience that will definitely put a smile on your face. So, if you like fast-paced sci-fi shooters, Vanquish is an easy recommendation. Its serviceable story, great presentation, and awesome gameplay makes it such an intriguing title from a different time.
Did you know? Early designs of Sam Gideon made him a heavier, slower soldier like Master Chief, but the team eventually changed into a sleek, more agile character, wanting to emphasize speed.
August may not have delivered the volume of earlier months, but it packed in a sharp dose of creative risk-taking and narrative ambition. And with the fall season looming, the stage was set for some of the year's biggest hits to arrive. September delivered a variety of standout titles, from superhero experimentation and first-person horror to one of the most important entries in strategy gaming. As the fall rush kicked off, the month balanced blockbusters with inventive smaller titles. The month started off strong with Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, a bold attempt to shake up the formula of previous Spider-Man games by bringing together 4 different versions of the web-slinger: Amazing, Noir, 2099, and Ultimate.
Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions remains one of the most unique games in Spider-Man's gaming catalog. To start, it's a Spider-Verse story where you play as 4 different Spider-Men, each with their own distinct worlds and playstyles, all of which are based on the comics. More specifically, there's the standard mainline Peter Parker that we're all familiar with, referred to as Amazing Spider-Man, and his world has a visual filter to make it look like it's within a comic. His playstyle primarily utilizes his webbing in creative ways, like making weapons out of them as he chains together combos. Then there's the Ultimate Universe, where we play as Symbiote Spider-Man. As you'd expect, his playstyle revolves around his symbiote suit, featuring plenty of tendril attacks, but also a rage mechanic that you can trigger for devastating results. I have to say, his missions are also the funniest.
I have become a being of pure energy, without pants!
Our third Spider is Spider-Man 2099. The visual style of his world is of course very futuristic, but it's also very high-flying, with plenty of missions where you have to successfully free-fall from location to location. 2099 also plays more as an agile melee fighter while incorporating claw attacks, which I thought was a really great inclusion. If you're unfamiliar with him, he's actually the only Spider-Man in this game who isn't Peter Parker and is instead a man named Miguel O'Hara, whose DNA was altered to be like Peter's, but his powers aren't identical. For example, talons on his hands and feet. Last but not least is my personal favorite, Spider-Man Noir. As the name implies, this Spider is more like a noir detective, and his world is very dark and moody to match. His playstyle differs quite a lot from the other Spider-Men in this game too, since instead of brawling your way through levels like they do, he'll instead require a stealthier approach to missions. I found this to be especially fun in the later levels, since they open up more, allowing you a lot of freedom in how you want to tackle them. One of my favorite details about the different Spider-Men in this game is that they're also played by actors who had previously voiced Spider-Man in various shows. The Amazing Spider-Man is voiced by Neil Patrick Harris, who had portrayed him in 2003's Spider-Man the New Animated Series. Josh Keaton voices Ultimate Spider-Man, and had previously played Peter in 2008's The Spectacular Spider-Man. 2099 is voiced by Dan Gilvezan, and he played Peter in 1981's Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Lastly, there's Christopher Daniel Barnes voicing Spider-Man Noir, after having played Peter in the 90s Spider-Man animated series. Another cool detail about Shattered Dimensions is its connection to the 2018 movie Into the Spider-Verse. Dan Slott, who was well known for his time writing comics in the Amazing Spider-Man series, also contributed to writing Shattered Dimensions. He later used the game as inspiration when writing the 2014 comic series simply titled Spider-Verse. This series in turn inspired the Into the Spider-Verse movie. So Shattered Dimensions was not only a very creative and unique game in its own right, but also very influential. It still holds up wonderfully today too, with smooth gameplay, beautiful visuals, and some fun surprises along the way. There's also an insane amount of comic book references and Easter eggs to uncover, which I fully explore in my retrospective for the game if you'd like to examine it further. But ultimately, there's a lot to love with Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, so it's no wonder that it remains one of Spider-Man's standout games to this day, and it's one that I'd highly recommend playing if you haven't already.
Did you know? Beenox were originally working on a game based on Raimi's Spider-Man 4, but when that got cancelled, they shifted development to the experimental concept that became Shattered Dimensions.
On September 8th, Frictional Games redefined indie horror with Amnesia: The Dark Descent, a game that terrified players not through combat, but through helplessness and atmosphere. Set in a decaying haunted castle, players navigated the darkness with only a lantern and their wits, trying to avoid sanity-shattering encounters with unspeakable horrors.
If you picked up Amnesia: The Dark Descent in this year, 2025, you might wonder what all the fuss was about. Getting chased around in reasonably lit corridors and castles by a botched analog horror design 3 pixels wide and 5 pixels deep, with a single awkward melee swipe attack, is not so scary anymore as it is merely thrilling or even silly. How could something like this be a horror legend? How could something like this be one of the most famous games of all time? How is it rated 10 out of 10 on Steam? Believe it or not, but Amnesia: The Dark Descent pioneered the survival horror genre as it exists today. Why? And how? Well, firstly, every survival horror game you've played since takes something from this experience, some vestige, some creative flourish that saw its inception in that 2010 title. And somehow, secondly, it revolutionized the concept of YouTube gaming and Let's Plays. Somehow, both of these factors intertwined perfectly to create a gaming big bang. Survival horror existed before Amnesia: The Dark Descent, this was nothing new, so did Let's Plays, and yet the game was perfect laugh-along react fuel for the budding Let's Play genre, and the Let's Play genre served as a vicarious method of living these experiences without needing to play them oneself. Hand in hand, they took off. Amnesia: The Dark Descent's clue is in the name. Like ice cream, it's cream that's iced, just as this game focuses on the dark descent of a man with self-induced amnesia. And that's not a spoiler. Our first-person main character Daniel finds himself waking up on the cold flagstone floors of Castle Brennenburg one fateful day, night, or evening, and he's left himself a series of notes to say, hey, the guy who owns this castle is really evil. Maybe too evil. He's down, way down below Castle Brennenburg, being evil. You need to go and stop him. I, Daniel of lucid mind and long-term memory, could not. And so that's what you go and do. Although the initial rooms are expectantly silent, littered with creepy crawlies that cluster along your screen, lit with cold candlelight and the stagnant illumination of a hostile moon nestled within a bleached otherworldly night sky, this is as cozy as the game will get. Amnesia: The Dark Descent delivers an atmosphere I could only describe as miserable. While explorations of their own can be rewarding, and reading about the gruesome atrocities committed within these walls over the last several months, occasionally by you, might I add, can be morbidly interesting, Amnesia: The Dark Descent is a distinctly lonely game. By the time you encounter a remotely friendly NPC, you'll easily have played over 4 hours in total isolation, despite their terrifying visage, curious vagueness, and barbed perimeter that injures you horribly should you ever try to step close enough for a much-needed hug. I can guarantee you will be happy to see them, and even tempted to help them. And similar to whipping up a delicious meringue, the point is the toil, because therein lies the atonement. Not for you, obviously, you're just as confused as Daniel is, but for him. Daniel did some bad stuff, and in all his guilt and fear, he could never bring himself to face Alexander head on. The amnesia potion allowed him to take the necessary distance from Alexander before challenging him again, and in doing so, rediscovering every lurid sin he ever committed, head on and fresh-faced. Still, that catharsis waits on the other side of a veritable maze of horrors, and somehow even worse, the castle's poorly maintained infrastructure. Elevators are broken, pieces missing, and stored across the castle. The tunnels below the main hall seem to have developed a nasty case of endometriosis. The invisible water monster hasn't been fed in days, and the magical MacGuffin sphere that opens the way to the final boss has been split into 6 perfect segments and then scattered across the final segment of the game in a variety of thought and stomach-provoking places. In gaming feats we'd later see littered across everything from Outlast to Alien Isolation, Amnesia is full of, cynically speaking, errand running. Every time you arrive at a new place and are handed your new set of objectives, you'll see exactly the domino of, but this has happened, but this is missing, but this is broken, set of obstacles in your path, and the set of roaming monsters you'll need to avoid to remedy this situation. Nothing is ever simple in survival horror, but in comparison to Alien Isolation especially, Amnesia: The Dark Descent never takes the piss. This game can be comfortably completed in about 6 hours, and its errands are varied enough that you're never rolling your eyes at the third missing key card of the minute. Every section is uniquely geared towards different tasks, uniquely structured, and albeit harder to discern what with it being a dark descent, uniquely visually designed. Although the win condition of this game is obviously escape the castle, that's like the least important bit. Even the final fight, if you could reasonably call it that, rings hollow when compared to the game as a whole. The fun of Amnesia: The Dark Descent lies in running for your life around an old Prussian castle from roaming monsters, jumping out of your skin when they appear out of nowhere, and using all your tinderboxes in the first hour so you have none left to go on. The pursuit by unkillable evil that resets you to the last checkpoint with no weapons to defend yourself has been paraded through almost every survival horror since. Visage, Layers of Fear, Banban's Kindergarten, and again, Alien Isolation, and the entire Outlast series. The thrill is in the chase, and I've got some bad news about which role you're playing. Let's Plays in survival horror featuring chase by unkillable evil had always existed, not merely in Penumbra, the precursor games to Amnesia, but in titles like The Clock Tower and Resident Evil 2 and 3. Still, Amnesia: The Dark Descent joined its compatriots at the most perfect possible moment to collide with the parallel surge in Let's Plays, catapulted like no game before or since into the gaming zeitgeist, set in stone as one of the most prolific titles of all time. Unfortunately, horror ages almost as badly as comedy. If you return to Amnesia: The Dark Descent nowadays, you might laugh at the frazzled textures, you might raise an eyebrow at the Play-Doh looking grunt enemies, you might roll your eyes at the cliched story of man with amnesia trapped in an unfamiliar place with only his demons to keep him company, and you might wonder what all the fuss is about. And that's fair. Besides a few moments that have you stressed or jumpy, Amnesia is unfortunately already the grandma of modern survival horror. She might not look like much now, feet propped up on the lazy boy armchair in the living room that smells like cigarettes, hands in her lap, watching Countdown on the TV, jam tarts baking in the oven in the room over, but in her heyday, you'd have never recognized her.
Did you know? The Dark Descent was developed by a team of just 5 people, and went on to become one of the most influential games of all time.
Serving as a prequel to the original Halo Combat Evolved, Halo Reach served as Bungie's final contribution to the franchise, and it was a send-off worthy of the studio's legacy. Players took on the role of Noble Six, a member of an elite Spartan unit fighting to defend the doomed planet of Reach. The game delivered a powerful narrative, memorable characters, and refined gameplay.
Hello, it is Creature!
Finally, we got the good content.
Gamers. We are the hand and voice of the people. From our rat kings to our enigmatic figures who speedrun porn games. We are the blessed few who know what we have lost. In this hellish era, a new Western industry collapse looms in the distance, and the eyes of the greedy corpos fall upon the free lands of the gamers once more. $100 video games, day one DLC, pre-ordering fucking in-game currency, and half-baked games that are the minimum viable product. This was not always the case. Let us look back into the relics of the old times to a champion from a bygone era. The era of the midnight releases, split-screen co-op, and screaming racial slurs in the Black Ops 2 lobby. Halo Reach.
That landing zone has been tagged by UNSC Command as a priority 1 target. Discharge link is loud and clear.
Copy that. Acquiring signal lock on the pylon.
Is a game that came out in September of 2010 and was an absolute banger. While some of the Halo purists might have hated it for the sprinting and armor locking and other armor abilities, it was the highlight of my childhood. Halo 3, I didn't finish because the flood scared the shit out of 8-year-old me. ODST is a game that introduced me to the horrors of war, and then Halo Reach, a game in which I thought I could actually save the world. What is there to really say about Halo Reach that hasn't been said a million times by many different long-form content creators? In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the other people in this little cacophony of creators talking about games from 2010 have already talked about Halo Reach in much greater depth and length than I am ever willing to go into. So, for the remainder of the allotted time given to me by Z, I will talk about how the game feels in the year of our Lord Anno Domini 2025. Since this game is well over a decade old, almost pushing 20 years at this point, the video game industry must have gotten a lot better. And if that logic holds, Halo Reach shouldn't be able to hold a candle to many of the amazing and well put together games that the Western video game industry has given us over the last few years. Because, let's be honest, if a game that is 15 years old can outperform games made with modern technology and near billions of dollars worth of funding, there's an issue. Now that I'm done poisoning the well, out of all of the AAA games that I've played in the last couple of years, only a handful can even stand up to or surpass the amount of fun and memorability of Halo Reach. In short, Halo Reach does not only stand up to modern games, it makes them look like trash in comparison. The game feels good, the armor loadouts are, well, I like them, so fuck you if you don't, but I can see where you're coming from. Abilities that make gameplay and firefights a little bit more dynamic are, in theory, a great idea, but are just kinda shit for multiplayer. But I'm only really gonna be talking about the campaign and how it feels. Unlike games today, say, the campaign can be beaten in like 20 to 30 hours, maybe a whole weekend if you're willing to no-life it, which, to be completely honest, after playing for a bit, is a large possibility, because Halo Reach was made during the era where you would get so invested into a game, being drawn in by the story, the settings, that it was common for players not even to realize that the sun was rising. Unlike a lot of modern games that have extremely padded play times, where dozens and hundreds of hours of grinding because the devs got lazy. Sorry, I'm still a little bit salty about Graveyard Keeper, but the points made in that video can apply to most AAA games that have come out for the last few years. Halo Reach doesn't need grindy loot box mechanics or battle passes or grindy time-wasting quotas, fetch quests, or collectathons that force you to keep playing. The game and the gameplay does that on their own, just like it should. I remember back to the earlier days of YouTube, and I should mention this is around the Diggy Hole time, not that one, I mean this one. I remember one of the YouTubers saying something along the lines of, a good game is the type of game that makes you think you've been playing it for like 20 minutes after work, and then the sun's coming up. And to be honest, 12-year-old me took that and fucking ran with it. Even to this day, that is how I judge games. If it can keep me invested, always thinking something like 5 more minutes and I'll stop, or 1 more after this section, I'll be good to go. And then I find myself playing for another 5 hours or attempting to one-shot the game in one night. If that's the case, it's probably a good game. The gunplay feels awesome. Every single gun has its own use, meaning there isn't a hyper meta one-size-fits-all type of shit for the weapons, and that also does carry over into the multiplayer. The AI is pretty complex, all things considered, and I am now genuinely annoyed that we don't get this kind of challenging AI in games anymore. They will react to you as the player and the other enemies. They will attempt to flank you, sneak up on you, they'll react and try and dodge your shots, and will fall back and group up with other groups of AI on the map if you start beating the shit out of them. The story in this game is very somber, but memorable. You're not only attempting to save a human world that's about to get glassed by the aliens, but Reach is almost like a second Earth in terms of population, and I believe in lore surpasses Earth in terms of production. For all the fellow Warhammer nerds out there, that would be like combining Mars and Cadia, and then Chaos randomly stumbles across it and is able to destroy it within a month. Even at its full might and being backed up by I think half the UNSC fleet, Reach still fell. And all during this, one by one, Noble Team is picked off until only one remains. I'm talking about June. The artwork in this game is absolutely awesome, and the game still holds up 15 years later. Reach was made during a time where every single game was trying to push the boundaries of graphical quality, so it makes sense, unlike the shit we see today. Halo Reach is awesome. The game is still fun, it still feels good, and I would say it feels even better after experiencing the current state of the video game industry. It's like a fine wine that takes us back to the time when games were actually fun, and you could buy a game and play it without it feeling like a fucking mobile game with the amount of loot boxes, in-game currencies, and day one DLCs. Also, not forgetting the day one patches as well. So if you've never played Reach, actually go and play it. Listen to me, you fucking Zoomers. I don't mean go watch gameplay of it on YouTube. I mean, go and play it for yourself. Some random dude's description of how the game is will never do it justice. Listen, hey, I see you fucking playing Fortnite on the other goddamn monitor. Put that shit away and go play fucking Reach.
Did you know? Reach's Noble Team was initially meant to be larger, but Bungie reduced it to an eventual 6 mains to have a more focused narrative.
A monumental entry in the legendary strategy franchise. Sid Meier's Civilization V streamlined many of the series' mechanics while introducing hexagonal tiles and 1 unit per tile combat. These changes brought a new layer of tactical depth and made the game more accessible to newcomers without sacrificing complexity.
Ahem. How do you know if someone is a fan of Civilization V? Don't worry, just go to any video about any other Civ game and they'll tell you! Hi everyone, Verak here. I was asked to talk to you today about Sid Meier's Civilization V. It's a game I love dearly, and I thought to myself when I was asked to make this section, do I really feel like glazing a game that gets basically nothing but glaze? Feels a little redundant. I want to do something different. I want to complain! So even though this is a game that I love, I'm going to get a little meta and complain about something. So to my fellow Civ 5 enjoyers in the audience, I hope you'll be patient with me, because I just gotta give the very vocal YouTube commenting fans of us a little ribbing. Civ 7 recently came out and is getting justifiably mixed reviews. This is a buggy mess that's got paid DLC on the way right after launch. You know what else was a buggy mess that had paid DLC right after launch? Civ 5! Now, granted, I think Civ 7 is doing it much more egregiously, but as far as I can tell, they've been testing the waters with what they can get away with ever since it worked with 5. I know most people already understand what I'm trying to get at here, but just to be absolutely clear, I'm not saying that Civ 5 is a bad game today, and I'm not saying you can't like it, and I'm not saying that you can't criticize the newest Civ game. All these things are fine. All I'm saying is, maybe we need to have a little perspective. Maybe some people don't know how the game was when it launched, or they weren't there, or they don't remember. But I was, so whenever I see these comments, I have to roll my eyes just a little bit, because they are the exact same comments that I saw back then. Now, I'd love to show you the Steam reviews from when the game came out to give you an example of this, but Steam reviews did not exist at the time. They only existed in 2013 after the game was fully fixed by its expansions. How convenient, right? So if you were mad about a game series that you loved and you wanted to get your voice out into the public, where did you go? Well, you either went to the Civ Fanatics forums, you went to Reddit, or you made your own blog post about it. We can illustrate what I've been talking about pretty clearly here with a thread about when the DLC for the Inca and Spanish were coming out just a few months after the game launched. This was still in 2010, or according to Reddit, 14 years ago. Here are some of the comments under it. Quote, "I'm going to wait a while to play Civ 5 again. I finally broke down and actually paid money for a game, and it was incomplete and sort of busted at release. Now they want me to pay per Civ? Fuck that. I'll locate my DLC elsewhere I don't have to pay. Next time work on debugging and balancing core design features of your game rather than nickel and diming idiots who love to shovel money into your DLC scheme." Another user says, "When will they release the DLC for working and better multiplayer? Because that was a thing. Civ 5 did not have working multiplayer for about 18 months, I think, after it came out." This person says, "More overpriced bullshit that should have been in the game to begin with." Not really a big deal though, since the core game design is so inherently flawed anyway. Damn. This person, a few years later, looking back at the release till that point, says, "I think that a lot of people forget, or never knew in the first place, what a steaming pile of shit Civ 5 was when it first came out. First, the game was just broken. It was littered with bugs and glitches. Then there's the fact that the game mechanics themselves were awful. And there's how diplomacy used to be. I mean, yeah, no Civ game has ever had a particularly smooth launch, but 5 took things into brand new levels of brokenness." I'm almost out of time here, so I want to end on a bit of a funnier note. If you ever want a good laugh, just go to the Civ 5 page for Attila the Hun on the Civ wiki, okay? I know it's fandom, and therefore it's not always accurate. Even if it isn't accurate, just how blunt it is makes me laugh. Their assertion is that the voice actor for Attila does not actually speak his native language, so all the notes for his voice lines are just people who speak Chuvash going, "Huh?"
Come and vara. Yes, man ranchavan. Puyan chalach, aman pisak to bashalach. Come and smaitan.
Anyway, that's all. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye!
Did you know? The game's director, John Schafer, initially got his start as a mod creator and beta tester for Civilization 3.
A smaller release with big ambitions, Dark Energy Digital's Hydrophobia stood out for its innovative water physics, which were central to both its gameplay and environmental storytelling. Set aboard a floating city under siege by terrorists, players used flooding corridors, broken pipes, and waves of water as both a tool and a threat.
Hydrophobia is an interesting word. Likely when you hear it, you think, that must be the irrational fear of water. And rightly so, that just makes sense. And in a way it is correct. But the irrational fear of water from a psychological perspective is actually referred to as aquaphobia. Now, hydrophobia is a fear of water, but it's not a psychological fear that causes anxiety, but more so a serious condition where your body physically becomes averse to drinking water. And it's mostly associated with the disease rabies. Not necessarily a phobia, but more so a virus tricking your brainstem into thinking that drinking water is painful to you, causing a visceral reaction when attempting to drink it. In 2010, a company called Dark Energy Digital released a game called Hydrophobia, and not surprisingly, the game is not about a person afflicted with rabies. And honestly, it's not a game about a person afraid of water in a traditional sense either. And like the title, this game is just flawed in many ways. Hydrophobia is a game that's been through a lot. In 2010, it was released as an Xbox Live Arcade title and touted by Microsoft as the first game in a new generation of high-quality titles that would far exceed the quality and experience offered by the side-scroller and arcade-style games that currently took over the marketplace. But in reality, the game was a buggy mess on release. It had confusing gameplay, terrible voiceover work, and it lacked a proper story. In fact, it was the first third of a story, as the game was meant to be episode 1 of a 3-part series. Instead of being stripped from the market and shamed back to making games about snooker, the team at Dark Energy decided to buckle down and fix the game, adding a significant patch to the game a few months after its release. So significant that they renamed the game entirely to Hydrophobia Pure. This wasn't even the last time that they did this. Several months after Pure, in early 2011, the developers rehauled the game even more drastically, reworking maps, rewriting the ending of the game, and adding more backstory as well as new voiceovers to the entire project. Once again renaming the game to Hydrophobia Prophecy, and unfortunately only releasing this version on the PlayStation 3 and Steam, leaving the outdated and unfinished versions to the schmucks on Xbox. It is kind of sweet seeing a developer take criticisms and use them to actually fix the game somewhat. Even the most recent version being Prophecy, having a way to tell the developers your issues right inside of the game. These comments go nowhere now as the developers no longer exist, but it's the thought that counts. This is the version that I played on the PC, and it's actually not terrible. Now, I've taken up the majority of my runtime here talking about the backstory to this game and rabies, because honestly, that's more entertaining than the game itself, but allow me to do a rapid fire review real quick. The whole thing is less of a game and more like a showcase meant to show off the proprietary engine that Dark Energy built called the Hydro Engine. Its unique capability being water. Realistically modeling flowing water that was pretty impressive back in 2010, and it's still kind of fun to toy around with even today. The water is the whole point of this game though. The gameplay was advertised as a player versus environment experience. The environment being water, as the game takes place in a massive ship of sorts that is attacked by terrorists that are trying to blow it up and sink it, causing a lot of water to flood into the ship. This game is set in a dystopian future in a world that has succumbed to overpopulation. The ship was built by a group of corporate giants and houses them and other rich people, while the rest of the world suffers on land. The terrorists are people that are mad about this. They also had this edgy catchphrase that they had time to scribble all over the ship: save the world and kill yourself. Now the gameplay of this game is rudimentary shooting and rudimentary platforming, both of which are not great. The gun that you get can shoot different kinds of bullets, but the basic ones called sonic rounds are the only ones that are unlimited, and as such are the only ones that you ever really use in the game. The other ones are too scarce and honestly too useless to use anyway. Enemies don't even die from a headshot with these sonic rounds, they just kind of pass out, and if they pass out in the water then they also drown, so it's still kind of a one-shot one-kill situation. Later in the game, the main character, her name is Kate by the way, gets infected by, you guessed it, rabies. Plot twist, it's been rabies the whole time. No, actually, it's just some kind of nano bug that gives her the ability to control water, which I understand sounds really cool, but actually it's very cumbersome and straight up not a good time. But you do use that to defeat the terrorist boss lady, so that's a good thing, I guess. All in all, Hydrophobia Prophecy is like a 3.5 out of 10. It's boring and janky, and the runtime is like 2 to 3 hours, but it's got some pretty waves.
Did you know? Hydrophobia was initially meant to be the first part of a 3-game series, but the sequels were cancelled due to poor sales and the eventual closure of Dark Energy Digital.
September solidified 2010's reputation as a year of big ideas and genre-defining entries. With October on the horizon, the year's most anticipated blockbusters were just around the corner. October delivered one of the most crowded and diverse release schedules of the year. From reimagined classics and sci-fi epics to brutal indie challenges and musical milestones, the month offered a little something for everyone. On October 5th, we got Castlevania Lords of Shadow. Mercury Steam's reboot of the Castlevania series reimagined the franchise as a cinematic action-adventure, drawing inspiration from games like God of War and Shadow of the Colossus. With sweeping environments, large-scale boss fights, and a more grounded narrative, Lords of Shadow marked a significant departure from the series' traditional formula. While some longtime fans were divided over the changes, the game was praised for its ambitious scope, orchestral score, and polished combat system. It helped bring the franchise to a new generation and paved the way for a brief but memorable trilogy. On the same day, we got Ninja Theory's Enslaved Odyssey to the West, a post-apocalyptic reimagining of the classic Chinese novel Journey to the West. The game followed Monkey and Trip, two unlikely companions navigating a ruined world filled with robotic threats and environmental storytelling. The game stood out for its strong performances, particularly by Andy Serkis, as well as its emotional narrative and vibrant world design. Though its combat and platforming were serviceable rather than groundbreaking, Enslaved earned praise for its characters and artistic vision, becoming a cult classic. On October 19th, Obsidian Entertainment took the reins of the Fallout franchise and delivered one of the most beloved entries with Fallout New Vegas. Set in the Mojave Wasteland, the game offered unparalleled role-playing depth, complex faction dynamics, and meaningful player choice.
So I'm going to be talking about a game that no one on the internet has ever covered before, and that game is Fallout New Vegas. Or, well, more specifically, how Mr. 16 times the detail himself undermined the entire events of New Vegas with his failed abortion of a live-action adaptation of the franchise.
You wanna make my cock explode now?
And how it subsequently betrays one of the most competently written and compelling characters in the entire series, if not all of gaming. Naturally, there will be spoilers for both Fallout New Vegas and the Amazon show, so if you're concerned about that, then, well, tough shit, because the entire premise of the video relies on them. But enough of my yapping, let's get slapping. So in the final episode of the series, there's a pre-war scene where Vault-Tec has gathered a large group of corporate representatives together to pitch a collaboration for their vaults. Bud and Barb lay out that, should they accept, each corporation will be given designated vaults to run their own personal experiments in the effort of designing the perfect conditions for humanity. To which, multiple people in the room pitched cartoonishly stupid and evil suggestions that would only result with either getting people killed or exclusively inflicting pain and misery on those who they're supposed to be creating the idealistic form of society for.
We could intentionally overcrowd a vault so people have to compete to survive inside it.
I realize this is intended to be a reference to the games with the certain experiments that were held in some of the vaults, but those trials were held, as unethical and evil as they were, with the goal of predicting what the outside world would be like and preparing the inhabitants to eventually rebuild society on the surface. It wasn't done simply for the hell of it. And it makes zero sense that Frederick Sinclair, someone who was very much a victim of Big MT's experiments during the construction of the Sierra Madre, along with having to overcome significant tragedies in his personal life, would be this nihilistic fat cat who wants to inflict pain and suffering on others, let alone representing Big MT at this meeting, because again, he would have been building his casino at this point. However, we then circle to Mr. House's response to all this.
There's a lot of earning potential with the end of the world, but we're talking about making a significant investment based on a hypothetical.
Who the hell are you, and what have you done with the real Mr. House? There would obviously not be a lot of earning potential with the collapse of human civilization. In fact, there would be zero earning potential due to practically everyone being fucking dead. Money itself would become absolutely worthless. It'd be one thing to have House investing in the vaults as a means of ensuring the survival of mankind, but that's not what's being suggested, because the bombshell revelation that's about to be dropped here is so remarkably insane that the helmet-wearing morons responsible for this scene legitimately shouldn't be left unsupervised around glue.
Our vaults have the resources to survive for centuries. Meanwhile, our competitors, every other human who isn't us, will be dead on the surface. That is how we will win the great game of capitalism, not by outfighting anyone, but by outliving them.
How can you guarantee results?
By dropping the bomb ourselves.
Cringe. There's no other word for it. This makes me cringe. It's embarrassing.
Barb and Bud's whole plan for winning the game of capitalism is to eliminate everyone that isn't Vault-Tec by dropping the nukes themselves, thereby essentially having no new future customers and hoping that after enough time, eventually everyone on the surface, aka their competition, will die off. Not only has this retconned Vault-Tec into being profoundly brain dead, but this also means Mr. House purposefully had the platinum chip
The one piece of technology that would have significantly upgraded his defense systems to be able to protect all of Vegas, printed a day late, and was totally on board with the entire planet getting practically annihilated along with all of his business ventures.
By 2065, I deemed it a mathematical certainty that an atomic war would devastate the Earth within 15 years. Every projection I ran confirmed it. I knew I couldn't save the world, nor did I care to, but I could save Vegas, and in the process, perhaps save mankind. I set to work immediately. I thought I had plenty of time to prepare. As it turned out, I was 20 hours short. The platinum chip was printed in Sunnyvale, California on October 22nd, 2077, the day before the Great War. It was to have been delivered by courier the following afternoon, but by then, the world had ended. The chip contained vital software upgrades, but not just for my Securitrons. Every aspect of the missile defense grid would have been upgraded too.
There's a lot of earning potential with the end of the world. How can you guarantee results?
By dropping the bomb ourselves.
This completely and irrevocably tosses Mr. House's entire character through a meat grinder, because his motivation throughout the course of the game is ensuring the survival of mankind and is arguably the best overall faction for the Mojave. The NCR, while broadly having good intentions, are riddled with incompetent or corrupt leadership and are stretched incredibly thin. They lack the resources and manpower necessary to maintain a solid position in the region, and groups like the Powder Gangers are a direct example of that. The Brotherhood of Steel only care about safeguarding pre-war technology because they believe Wastelanders can't be trusted with it, and even then are a mere fraction of what they once were. The Legion are a bunch of unified raiders and slavers that place all their faith in a man who believes that the individual's sole worth is that of total devotion to the collective good of the state and its dictator. Meanwhile, Mr. House is the only one with the means and desire of reigniting technological development to a point of being able to place human colonies on a planet untouched by nuclear devastation. Again, what would he possibly stand to gain by A, not only refusing to tell everyone that Vault-Tec plans on dropping nuclear bombs, but B, purposely having the platinum chip printed a day late, thereby having to spend whole decades looking for it? And to make all of this even worse, Mr. House's ending, along with all the other endings for that matter, are rendered absolutely meaningless because later on in that episode we see that New Vegas is in total ruins. House's aspiration of keeping New Vegas stable and secure for future generations as a means of further advancing technological progress for mankind lasted only 15 years at best. Bethesda and the showrunners, through their own hubris and turbocharged idiocy, somehow managed to trivialize the events of an entire game rich with player choice, a compellingly nuanced narrative, a fully fleshed out faction system, and 4 distinct endings because fuck you, Todd said so. But hey, what can you expect from a company that releases next-gen updates that effectively break the games they released over a goddamn decade ago?
And that sometimes it doesn't just work.
Did you know? New Vegas only took around 18 months to make, while its predecessor Fallout 3 took 4 years.
One day later, Team Meat's brutally difficult indie platformer Super Meat Boy exploded onto the scene with its tight controls, clever level design, and pixel-perfect precision. The game followed a small, sentient cube of meat on a bloody quest to save his girlfriend, Bandage Girl, from the nefarious Dr. Fetus.
Let's talk about Super Meat Boy. Okay, first of all, I have a personal experience with this game. Now, just in general, Super Meat Boy is a game that, when it came out, was sort of the heyday of YouTube Let's Plays, right? Like, back when we had a lot of these, like, punishing games that intentionally try to make games like impossible. There's like that one game called like I'm the Guy or whatever, and Super Meat Boy was basically filling that niche, but trying to do it a game that had a little bit more substance. Like, a game had a story, but that was not the most interesting thing in the world. But it did try to do something different though, which is to try to at least make that incorporate well into a punishing yet interesting game. Visually, I mean, it's not like the best looking game compared to what we have today with, like, you know, if we ever get Silk Song, I mean, you know, I mean, yeah, it doesn't look as good as like more modern games. Before its time, it was trying to sort of like jump into that wave of the time, which was like these impossible games, right? These insanely impossible games, but trying to at least do it at a more professional level, which is why I think this game got popular. It definitely was helped by YouTube fame. Like, the game got propelled because of its difficulty and by content creators actually covering it. And I think that's the best aspect of Super Meat Boy. It's just the fact that the game was constantly super rewarding, and it was a Metroidvania-esque game, a side-scroller that sort of became the Dark Souls of side-scrolling games. Generally speaking, it had a fun, interesting story, which, I mean, it's not super important for a game like this to begin with, but it was fun, it was cute, it was intriguing, and on top of that, it also had fun visuals. Like, visually speaking, this game was unique, and Super Meat Boy is just, like, an iconic character at this point for, like, the 2010s. Like, if you grew up during that time on YouTube, you would have seen somebody, at least one YouTuber that you knew of, that definitely played through this game. So yeah, you know what? Super Meat Boy, great game. I mean, I don't think it really, you know, stands the test of time nowadays compared to other games. Like, you have way better games nowadays that do the exact same thing but better. But for its time, it was sort of like, I would say, the gate that opened up, letting other games come to fruition. Like, without Super Meat Boy, I don't think we'd have other games like Hollow Knight and Dead Cells and things along that nature. Wouldn't exist if Super Meat Boy didn't pave the way to start with the help of course, a bunch of content creators.
October 26th, we got another trio of releases. Fable 3 continued Lionhead Studios' RPG series with an ambitious two-part structure. First as a revolutionary hero rising to power, and then as a monarch balancing the needs of a kingdom. The game retained the franchise's whimsical tone, morality systems, and player-driven choices, while introducing new layers of political consequence.
If anyone ever tells you that bad games can't be endearing, point them in the direction of Fable 3. Because you could certainly make an argument for this 2010 title being terrible, and yet I still love it. Sure, the Fable series had never lived up to its potential, and the game's marketing campaigns were always known for being liberal with the truth, so it's a strange series that ultimately gets by on the grit of its wit. Fable as a series always boasted an absurd sense of humour that granted it identity, even when its overall gameplay systems haven't had too much going for them. Fable 3 gives us an Industrial Revolution-inspired fantasy setting, with a strange obsession with chickens, where we play as the king's younger brother. Unfortunately, however, King Michael Fassbender has completely lost the plot, so we have to escape the castle and spark the revolution. To do this, we'll need a magical frisbee that says we're special and gives us impromptu spontaneous orgasms. We also need to enlist the aid of a blind woman named Teresa who stands in this strange realm and gives us vague statements every once in a while. And our mission is to travel the land and cultivate allies for regicidal purposes. And no, the plot does not venture far from that skin-deep summary, really. Its enrichment comes from the game's general wicked sense of humour, and frankly, utterly ludicrous cast. It's not unengaging necessarily, it's just incredibly simple and padded out with its humour, which is fine for Fable, I guess it's what I came to enjoy. As for the general gameplay, it's nothing spectacular. Combat is incredibly easy because you can't die. If you get knocked out, you just get back up again, to very limited meaningless consequence. So to challenge myself for the purpose of this video, I committed to a no knockout run, which was going well until it suddenly wasn't. The combat is quite straightforward: dodge, block, attack, power attack. You can use your sword, you can use guns, you can use magic, but is it satisfying under the finger? No, because the input delay needs written notice, and the rest of the game is equally simple. Traipse around small open world spaces grossly underrepresented by the map, rendering navigation outside following a glowing trail quite painful. Engage in spirited side quests, I will give Fable 3 that, giving your dog a silly name because it's funny, having questionable interactions with people in passing, engaging in jobs such as playing the lute, baking pies, or blacksmithing, following your dog to treasure out in the wilderness, while fending off the most predictable random encounters known to man, getting married and having kids through the devilry that is unprotected sex, holding strangers by the hand so you can take them to a secluded area and kill them, and don't get me started on the f***ing gnomes. I don't trust gnomes, and I blame Fable 3. The game shines primarily on its charm alone. What other game can you think of that has such an intense chicken iconography?
You can kick it.
You can even bet on chicken races, and I have it on good authority it's a slippery slope. But the facet from which I derive the most pleasure while playing this game is amassing wealth. Become a property mogul by purchasing every house in Albion and hiking the price through the roof. Become a business mogul by purchasing every business in Albion and hiking the price through the roof. Watch your coffers swell as you crash this fictitious economy. And you can do it all while wearing a chicken costume. Fable 3 is a game only for certified smegma males. Today, we make pies. Tomorrow, world domination. The people may very well hate you, but don't worry, you own them too. Fable 3 is a fundamentally ridiculous game in a fundamentally ridiculous series. It's a kind of nonsense you can switch your brain off to. Sure, the concept of turning Albion into a capitalist dystopia through baking pies is hilarious, but that's precisely the game's intent. It's a stupid game. And in that respect, while Fable 3 is not the most spectacular game in any facet really, in particular, it at the very least accomplished what it had set out to do, and that is to be fundamentally ridiculous. That being said, there are moments where it isn't absurd enough, and moments of genuinely laughable poor design. For instance, whose idea was it to make the pause screen a playable world space? I mean, it sounds great on paper, but in practice, it makes navigating to particular things when you need them a relatively tedious affair. But I digress. I couldn't tell you what exactly it is about Fable 3 that makes it so appealing to me, despite the fact that it's quite awful. I think the fact I first played it when I was 10 years old and was yet to develop critical thought probably helped somewhat, but as time went on and my intelligence grew and then inevitably quite sharply shrank, no matter what flaws I now realise, I will always have time for Fable 3. But I'll end this criminally short segment on this. This is a game with a soul, and it beams through everything that you see on screen. And that's more than I can say for a lot of games that have released since.
Did you know? Fable 3's soundtrack was composed by Russell Shaw, featuring a live orchestral performance with music dynamically evolving based on situations the player finds themselves in.
Rock Band 3 was the high point of the music rhythm genre's popularity, introducing new features like keyboard support and a pro mode for more realistic instrument play. With a massive library of songs and tight gameplay mechanics, it offered the most complete band simulation to date. The game was both a technical and creative achievement, appealing to both casual and hardcore players alike. While the genre's popularity would wane soon after, Rock Band 3 remains a standout for its depth, innovation and sheer fun. And lastly, a follow-up to the original Force Unleashed, the sequel continued the story of Starkiller, Darth Vader's secret apprentice. The game doubled down on cinematic presentation and Force powers, delivering fast-paced, visually impressive action.
Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2. Alright, now I'm gonna tell you right now, I love Star Wars The Force Unleashed. I loved the first game, even though I technically played the second game before it. That's a weird convoluted thing. But yes, I really enjoyed the Force Unleashed 2. Weirdly enough though, I played this game on the Wii, so that should pretty much tell you what that felt like. It was a very messy way of playing it. I even played Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 on the Wii. Terrible experience. But nonetheless though, this game is a weird one because Star Wars The Force Unleashed, to begin with, the original game, was lovely to a lot of people because of, well, a lot of different things. It was a detachment away from what Star Wars was used to. We technically kind of play as a bad guy initially, so to say, and also just the plot that was being told in this specific game, or at least in the original game, was a little bit more unique to Star Wars. Star Wars has a very jolly nature to it, even though, I mean, people are dying constantly, but like the way Star Wars works, it's not what we see in The Force Unleashed. So when Force Unleashed 2 was announced, a lot of people got excited because the first game was beloved. And, well, this is where people get a little bit of a problem. Now, first of all, the story, well, if you haven't played it, generally speaking, not as good. A lot of people have complaints. It just wasn't reaching that same level that the original Force Unleashed did, but it's not the end of the world, right? It's not the biggest problem in the world. However, it kind of was for a lot of people because they felt like the Force Unleashed 2 just didn't do enough to differentiate itself. I mean, the combat was still fun, okay? I love the combat. I like hacking and slashing through people. I like just force picking up a bunch of fucking dudes and just tossing them away. It's fun. It's enjoyable. I mean, I cannot deny that it's a fun way to play the game, but it gets repetitive. I think that's the issue, right? Like, the enemy encounters can be very samey after a while in the game, and after a while, you just kind of lack any variety in what you get to battle against. I think that's where the game suffers. I think this is where, like, new modern games, like the newer, like, EA-based games, I'm not talking about Battlefront, I'm talking about the other ones that are more Dark Souls-y in nature. Those games kind of, like, do it better, or did it better now, than what Force Unleashed 2 did. But at the end of the day, I think it's still a fun game. It was a game that, in my opinion, defined my experience of the Wii. Yes, oddly enough, I played, again, how did I play this game on a Wii? It makes no sense, but I did, and it was still fun, and I think that's the biggest thing. If the game is fun, that's all what matters, and to be fair, I enjoyed the story, though to most people, the whole clone thing and all that wasn't really the most favorable of aspects, but I enjoyed it, and that's all I'm going to say. The game was fun, the combat was fun, it wasn't revolutionary, but honestly, I don't think it needed to be revolutionary. I'd love to see a Force Unleashed 3 that tries to evolve and change, like, this concept and try to do more with it. I think that would be a really cool idea if they were to ever do another Force Unleashed, but I highly doubt that's ever going to happen. But Force Unleashed 2 was a game that, in my opinion, at least defined my 2010. He keeps forcing me to do this, by the way. Like, I cannot escape it. He keeps just telling me to do it every time.
October was a month defined by variety and ambition, from blockbuster RPGs and indie darlings to franchise reboots, rhythm game finales, and a sequel so bad it made Chief Talks refuse to even review it. The month marked a high point in a year already brimming with memorable experiences. With only 2 months left, 2010 was heading towards a powerful finish. As the holiday season approached, November brought a mix of blockbuster sequels, colorful comebacks, and genre-blending experiments that capped off the year's momentum with style. On November 9th, Treyarch's Call of Duty Black Ops pushed the franchise into Cold War territory, offering a globe-trotting campaign filled with twists, conspiracies, and gritty action.
First off, I want to thank Zanyverse for not only inviting me to this project, but for allowing me to cover the biggest franchise in gaming, Call of Duty. And since this year's video covers 2010, Call of Duty Black Ops falls to me. Call of Duty Black Ops is by far, and this is not hyperbole by the way, the best Call of Duty ever made. This game is absolutely stacked with content. It has a full-fledged, balls-to-the-wall campaign with the same addictive competitive multiplayer the series is now known for, and an expanded co-op zombies mode. The campaign here is just an absolute roller coaster and features some of the most iconic missions in Call of Duty history. How about SOG, where you're thrust right into the Battle of Khe Sanh, defending against waves of North Vietnamese troops. The first time I saw all of these soldiers out in the distance, my jaw hit the floor. I don't think I had seen this many units on the screen in a shooter before. Picking up an M60 and just laying into these guys felt so damn cool. I felt like Rambo or something. Or what about the mission Numbers, where you're jumping from rooftop to rooftop in the Kowloon walled city, blasting dudes with akimbo SMGs and sniping guys off rooftops, all while this badass song plays in the background. Here, take a listen real quick.
You're getting shut up! Hurry up!
And the thing is, this isn't the only moment in this game that's like this. It's just this absolutely batshit insane campaign. I don't think there's a single bad mission in the entire game. And to my surprise, the story in this game is shockingly good. Like, actually good, not just good by Call of Duty standards good. The story primarily revolves around Alex Mason, a CIA operative who ends up getting captured in Cuba after a failed assassination attempt on Fidel Castro. After his capture, he's sent to the Soviet prison Vorkuta. At Vorkuta, the Soviets attempt to brainwash Mason into becoming a sleeper agent to assassinate the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. Crazy, right? But it gets even crazier than this. See, the brainwashing didn't totally work. Instead, another Soviet prisoner, Viktor Reznov, sabotages their work and instead brainwashes Mason into targeting 3 people: Steiner, Dragovich, and Kravchenko. See, these 3 men created Nova 6, a toxic gas that Kravchenko plans to weaponize against the United States. It kills its targets within seconds, so it's like some really nasty stuff. But for Reznov, this isn't about saving the United States from pure destruction. This is personal. In the flashback mission Project Nova, the gas is used on his friend Dmitry Petrenko, who was the primary protagonist of the Soviet campaign in the last Treyarch Call of Duty, World at War. This is great. Like, I love how they brought World at War into this and sort of gave a new purpose to both Petrenko, even though he unfortunately passes, and Reznov. If this sounds crazy to you, this really is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm telling you guys, I'm barely even digging into this story. It's just this insane roller coaster of emotions, and the big twist at the end, oh my god, it blew my mind as a teenager. I was not ready for it. This entire game is a story of brainwashing, of manipulation, of lies and backstabbing. It's a fantastic campaign, but it is short, clocking in at just 4 or so hours, so what is there to do afterwards? What kept me coming back? Spoiler, it was the multiplayer, and boy oh boy, this is where Call of Duty peaked. The game launched with 14 maps, and these are some of the best launch maps in Call of Duty history. Firing Range, Jungle, Summit, Cracked, Grid, WMD, and the always popular Nuketown debuted in this game. Some of these maps have been brought back multiple times, and to me that proves how popular they still are today. The game has 44 guns, 32 2 of those being primary. Some of my favorites are the AK-74, the FAMAS, the AK-74U, the Commando, the AUG. If I keep going, I'm just gonna list off every gun in the damn game, but innovation is what made Black Ops multiplayer so addictive and such a blast to play. Black Ops kept much of what made the competitive multiplayer so good. The prestige system, the classes, emblems and player cards, perks, weapon skins and attachments, challenges. They just tweaked and made small changes to that existing formula. So for example, now you could create your own emblems to put on your guns instead of all of the pre-made ones. The game now had 15 prestiges instead of 10, but the single biggest change to me was the introduction of COD points. And no, I don't mean that garbage premium currency that's in modern Call of Duty. In Black Ops, these COD points were earned just by playing the game, and were used to buy new perks, new guns, attachments, hell even new shapes for the emblem editor. COD points weren't just used for unlocking things, no. In this Call of Duty, they introduced contracts. Contracts function sort of like challenges, think of them more as like timed challenges, I guess. You'd put up a certain number of COD points, and then you'd have a limited amount of time to complete the contract, and it would pay out more than you paid in. The more expensive the contract, the harder it was to complete, but also the more it would pay out. So it was a gamble, but if you were confident, you could knock out a few of these in an hour or two. It wasn't like the end of the world if you failed a contract. On top of this, you could gamble away your COD points in wager matches. In wager matches, everyone puts up a certain number of COD points, and the top 3 players at the end of the game get paid out points, whereas the bottom 3 walk away with nothing. These aren't traditional game modes either. Wager matches consist of gun game, one in the chamber, sticks and stones, and sharpshooter. Gun game was usually my favorite. Everyone starts off with the same gun, and each time you get a kill, you move on to the next gun until you cycle through all of them. One in the chamber was cool too. Everyone starts with a revolver with one shot. Every shot that lands on a target will kill them, and each time you kill someone, you get another bullet in your gun. It's super fun, really intense, and if you kill someone with your knife, then you could have 2 or 3 or as many bullets as you could hold in your gun. Sticks and stones and sharpshooter were okay, but I never really found myself playing them all that often. In Sticks and Stones, you're given a bow and arrow with explosive tips and throwable tomahawks. Getting kills with the arrow awards 100 points, but if you die to a tomahawk, you lose all points you've earned and have to restart at 0. I was never good enough, and this mode never, it never really excited me. Sharpshooter was just kinda, it was too tame for me. It was kinda lame. How it works is that everyone in the game has the same weapon, and you're just racking up kills. After some time, the gun is cycled out to a new one, and this repeats until the time limit is reached. It's just, it never excited me like the other modes. Like, it kind of just felt like it was there to be there. In wager matches, kill streaks were disabled, but Black Ops had some super cool new kill streaks, as well as some badass ones returning. This was the first game with the RCXD, the little RC car with a bomb strapped to it that still pops up in the modern games. This was also the first game with the Blackbird, which is an advanced UAV that shows not only enemy players on the minimap, but shows you their direction and updates in real time, as opposed to the standard UAV's sweeping radar. A big one they brought back was dogs, which were devastating in World at War. They're just as hostile and aggressive here, though I don't believe they last as long as the dogs did in World at War. Don't quote me on that though. One of the biggest additions to this game was theater mode. Finally, Call of Duty had a replay system. You could play back any game you saved and move the camera around and add slow-mo. It was so awesome. While filming for this video, I found some of my clips from 2012. The theater mode hasn't worked for a while now for new clips, but you can still access your old saved ones. Awesome. I thought I was gonna have to rely on footage from theater mode because I was convinced I wouldn't find any lobbies on any platform. PC is a no-go due to some security issues, so I tried to find lobbies on the Xbox 360, which I only found one in the few nights that I tried. But on PS3, totally different story. I found lobbies instantly on multiple different nights. Hard to believe that 15 years later, this game still has an active community of a few hundred players. I was having a blast. It reminded me of why I fell in love with this Call of Duty all those years ago. Unfortunately, I don't know how else to say this, zombies is not why I fell in love with COD though. I know I'm gonna get some flack for this, but I personally never really saw the fun in zombies. That's not what you want to hear from the guy who just spent the last few minutes rambling on about multiplayer and COD from 15 years ago, but I truly never saw the appeal. There's just too much downtime, and I always thought it took too long to really get to the harder levels. I don't feel comfortable talking about a mode I never really played or enjoyed, so I'm not going to. I just think it's a testament to how good this game really is, to where I'm hyping it up for only having 2 out of the 3 things we expect in Call of Duty, and so that just about sums it up for this one, guys. Call of Duty Black Ops is a phenomenal game that had a grip on my senior year of high school. I skipped school for, I'm pretty sure, like a week at release just to play Black Ops. I hit first prestige before I came back to school, and I hit 15th prestige in April of 2011, just 5 months after it came out. I mean, I'm telling you guys, this had an absolute chokehold on me. I no-lifed the hell out of this game. This Call of Duty released at the perfect time in my life, and I feel better knowing that me and the boys bonded over it. I regret nothing.
Did you know? Black Ops' first mission, Operation 40, where players assassinate Fidel Castro, led to backlash from the Cuban government, as they called the game an act of propaganda.
After years of inconsistent 3D outings, Sonic Colors was a return to form for Sega's Blue Blur. Released on the Wii, the game introduced a vibrant interstellar theme and wisps, power-ups that granted unique abilities and encouraged creative platforming. With tight level design, a bright aesthetic, and a more restrained story, Sonic Colors stood out as a rare critical and commercial success in modern Sonic history. It helped rebuild trust in the series and laid groundwork for future titles like Generations. On November 16th, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood picked up immediately after the events of the second game, continuing Ezio Auditore's story as he built a resistance force in Renaissance Rome. The game refined the franchise's parkour and combat systems while introducing the Brotherhood mechanic, allowing players to recruit and command fellow assassins.
Zany has given me 5 minutes for this segment, and historically, I'm not great at Brotherhood is my second favourite of the franchise it is a part of, the first being a game I've talked about for longer than you probably give a shit, but I wouldn't begrudge anyone holding Brotherhood as their favourite, because this thing is still fucking sublime. However, if this one is your favourite, I will hold a grudge, and I will fight you about it. I've never agreed with the assertion that things are a product of their time. If a game is good, it's good. When it's made doesn't factor in. Tetris is a masterpiece, and Final Fantasy XVI is fine, and Brotherhood is one such game that, to me, is timeless. It functions as both a sequel to Assassin's Creed as an overall episodic story, but also a sequel to Ezio, the main character of Assassin's Creed, probably for the rest of time, and it does that really effectively. Despite how strong Assassin's Creed 2 is, please understand the nuance of my opinion cannot fit into 5 minutes, I love Assassin's Creed 2, it backpedaled on a lot of aspects of Assassin's Creed 1, it felt somewhat compromised in a lot of areas, but Brotherhood feels incredibly confident, and it shows that off in its biggest strength: focus and cohesion. I've always said Assassin's Creed 1 is a linear game in an open space. It's not trying to be an open world game. Everything has purpose and direction and ties back around to its theming and character journey. It doesn't waste space. Everything it does has defined artistic purpose. Brotherhood is the same, but with a character like Ezio, you make activities work. They aren't side missions, that's not what Brotherhood has. It has optional missions that are part of your main goal. Let me explain. Ezio goes to Rome to dismantle the Borgia, to free its people, to give the city a fighting chance at freedom. The main story conveys that, but your experience is actually enhanced by the optional missions. They are all related in some way to Ezio's liberation of Rome, and that context creates meaning to what you're doing. They are no longer distractions to the main story, but companions to it, assassinating targets that are high-ranking or affiliated with the Borgia, helping your factions either through missions that deal with their own specific problems, or simply a list of challenges that are contextualized as Ezio training and testing them to make them stronger, tracking major Templar figures causing trouble for specific individuals, renovating the city, helping the economy, and in turn, those living in poverty. Even the tomb missions, which are a mission type carried over from Assassin's Creed 2, have the spin that these lairs are home to the followers of Romulus, a cult that are being manipulated by the Borgia, using their beliefs against them as a tool for control. Everything you do in Brotherhood, minus the Copernicus conspiracy, this sucks but it was a PS3 exclusive mission so it doesn't really count, is conducive to a point, and this makes Brotherhood feel like one singular connected experience in a way that not a lot of open world games often achieve to this degree. The actual means with which you engage with the game though are hit and miss. I don't think Assassin's Creed has ever truly developed systems that hit its true potential. They often rip stuff out and reinvent it to the point that nothing can be iterated on, but Brotherhood is still very strong despite that. Assassin's Creed 1's combat felt slow yet intentional with a lot of strategy involved. Usually it was something to be avoided. Assassin's Creed 2, being more of an action game though, had combat be more prominent. However, it stripped elements and simply made the combat feel obnoxiously obtrusive at points. In Brotherhood, they streamline this. They don't give it more depth, but they decide instead to focus primarily on giving the player the experience of embodying the Ezio we see in the cinematic trailers. You can dispatch entire groups in seconds and make it look incredible at the same time. The combat is supposed to be experiential. It's far more about expression with your choice of weapon and retaining the highest combo chain than it is about surviving the fight. If you die in Brotherhood, you suck. Objectively, I do think this system could have been pushed further by giving Ezio little health. Maybe you can only take 2 hits before you die, making combat a real risk, but one that would feel endlessly rewarding if successfully pulled off. A glass cannon is what an assassin should be. Ezio is just a tank, and despite the flow state, it can still make it monotonous. Brotherhood was the first game in the series, I feel, to truly handle stealth in a way that felt organic and rewarding. There's thematic reasons for that, but I don't have the fucking time. Giving you the ability to charge knives to multi-kill from a distance, the faster hidden gun, a crossbow for consistent instant kills at a distance, poison darts for more options to poison at range, smoke bombs you can throw at enemies, and the all-important Brotherhood system allows you to be incredibly creative with how you engage stealth situations. You feel like a predator in this game, which makes a lot of sense given the company who made it is full of them, and its general mission design only enhances this with plenty of infiltrations and open areas, be it in the optional missions or the main path itself. Brotherhood always feels more open and free in a way that Assassin's Creed 2 could often not, and that's never been more true than with its movement. It's no secret that those first 4 games have the best parkour mechanics in the franchise. You might prefer the later games, I don't contest that, but the first 4 games have a system that gives all the control to the player. See either of these videos for more on that, and Brotherhood knows this. It has so many levels that centre around the parkour mechanics themselves, stretching even into the modern day. They knew this type of level design was a winner and just went all in. It's crazy that Assassin's Creed used to have such good parkour that it could build core levels around it that tested your ability to do it efficiently. These are the best missions ever to grace this franchise, and so the obvious next step for Ubisoft was to completely remove them forever because God forbid Ubisoft makes something good. But this freedom isn't just compelling for gameplay, it is once again important thematically. Freedom is a central pillar of the Assassin Brotherhood, and making that central to your mechanical design only props up what the game is trying to say. Brotherhood is an incredibly important game for Ezio. Assassin's Creed 2 is formative. It's Ezio understanding the world and himself. Brotherhood is him putting that into action. Brotherhood is a story about finding identity, finding purpose, finally connecting with the ideals that shaped him and his past and putting those into practice to restore an order which symbolically represents hope in a city that desperately needs it. It does this through Ezio's turbulent relationship with Machiavelli, in many ways a representation of a younger Ezio. Yes, Machiavelli is younger than Ezio, 10 years in fact. They do it through his connection to his allies and peers and even his own family. Brotherhood allows its story to be absorbed far more through subtext and inference than Assassin's Creed 2 did, and that in itself harkens back to Assassin's Creed 1, as do the methods employed by Ezio in Brotherhood that he learned from Altair himself. It's all connected, man, it's cohesive, I love this shit. And Assassin's Creed wouldn't be Assassin's Creed without— I know I've run over 5 minutes, just give me a sec, please, Zany, just give me a sec. And Assassin's Creed wouldn't be Assassin's Creed without the modern day, as much as Ubisoft may try to make it so. Desmond's journey in this game is so fantastically executed. Assassin's Creed 2, again, pulled back. It tried too hard to address criticism and made the modern day take a back seat. It was a huge overcorrection. Not that Assassin's Creed 1 needed to be corrected, but you take my meaning. Brotherhood, in contrast, is, again, incredibly confident. The only necessary modern day takes place both at the start and the very end, and these sections, I feel, are far and away the most compelling modern day sequences in the series. The opening invites you into the mystery, but then gives you Ezio straight up. It sets the scene, it gets you into things without obstruction, but the mystery was always lingering over the top. So once Ezio falls from his horse and you're ejected from the Animus, it feels like a natural breaking point whilst also finally following up on the mysterious opening to give context, and from there it delivers character in droves. It spends the entire next 15 to 20 minutes getting you acquainted, helping you understand, building a complete sense of tonal dissonance to ground you in something entirely different from what was done with Ezio, and it's absolutely brilliant. I love these guys. They're such an incredible team with such charisma, individuality and identity, all things valuable to assassins, but also they have incredible chemistry. And so, while you never have to visit the modern day again until the very end of the game, you can choose to. At several points there will be a little exclamation mark on the Leave Animus button in the pause menu, meaning there is more stuff to see. Conversations to deepen connection and provide context and character depth, little interactables to add charm.
Hey, what's the matter you, Altair?
That's racist.
You're racist.
And emails to read, similar again to the first game, which allows you to slowly absorb information and piece together a grander and more mysterious story. But it's all entirely optional, as is the explorable modern Monteriggioni, which doesn't have much in the way of stuff other than a couple little relics you can pick up, but it doesn't have to. The fact that it's here at all, the vibe it creates is enough. It's there for tone, for grounding you in a space that feels so different and makes it all feel real. Brotherhood is the perfect successor to the first Assassin's Creed in that way, and it does everything it does remarkably efficiently. There's so much more to talk about. Trying to fit this script into such a short space was both a challenge that I failed, and the equivalent to reaching for something that's slightly out of reach, but you don't want to get up to pick it up, so you just keep straining in hopes your arm will get longer. When I can't make multi-hour full comprehensive retrospectives and have to leave out important details, I end up literally looking like the guy from this meme. Next time I do this, I want a 3-hour time slot and also a large bag of grapes as payment. I'd be very happy with that.
Did you know? Brotherhood was developed in only 1 year, a much shorter time compared to previous entries.
On November 22nd, Telltale Games delivered a quirky surprise with Poker Night at the Inventory, a crossover poker sim featuring characters like Max, Strong Bad, Heavy, and Tycho. The game mixed casual poker gameplay with humorous dialogue and fan service, creating a laid-back, personality-driven experience.
I've been thinking a lot about how we interact with fictional characters lately. There's something fascinating about how desperately we want to just hang out with characters we love. Fortnite understands this. We don't necessarily need innovative gameplay when we can just be Spider-Man doing a silly dance. And that's what makes Telltale's Poker Night at the Inventory so interesting. It's a game that recognized this desire way back in 2010. The premise is simple. You're playing poker with the Heavy from Team Fortress 2, Strong Bad from Homestar Runner, Max from Sam and Max, and Tycho from Penny Arcade. That's it, that's the whole game. No twists, no innovative mechanics, just Texas Hold'em with some beloved characters in a secret underground club called The Inventory. Today, we have games like Balatro that take poker and transform it into something entirely new and different. Poker Night went the opposite direction. It took something familiar, poker, and populated it with characters we already knew and loved. Rather than innovate on gameplay, it innovated on context. This speaks to something deeper about entertainment today. We live in an era where every movie is a sequel, every game is a franchise, and everything new tries desperately to remind you of something old. And while we often criticize this, rightly so, Poker Night shows us why it works. Sometimes we just want the comfort of familiar faces in a new situation. The game gives you $10,000 in play money and sits you down at a table. The Heavy will boast about his massive bets. Max will make unhinged observations. Strong Bad keeps his ego-driven bravado, and Tycho maintains his cynical wit. It works because it feels authentic. These characters behave exactly how you'd expect them to behave if you were really playing poker with them. What's remarkable is how natural it feels. The conversations flow organically, responding to the current state of play. When the Heavy goes all in, the other characters react exactly as their established personas would suggest. It's fan service, sure, but it's fan service that understands its characters. Ironically, for a game about hanging out with familiar characters, you can't actually hang out with them anymore. The game was delisted from Steam, a casualty of Telltale's collapse under Kevin Bruner's leadership. It's a shame, because while the gameplay itself was never revolutionary, it represented something that's become increasingly relevant: our desire to simply exist in the same space as characters we care about. Look at games today. Crossovers aren't just common, they're expected. Fortnite has become a virtual playground where Batman can have a dance battle with Naruto while John Wick watches. Multiverses lets Warner Brothers characters duke it out. Even Nintendo finally let Mario and Sonic compete in the same games. We've moved beyond just wanting to play as these characters. We want to interact with them, exist alongside them, share space with them. Poker Night at the Inventory understood this before most others did. It recognized that sometimes the most innovative thing you can do isn't to reinvent the gameplay. It's to give players a new way to spend time with characters they already love. It's about creating a space where these interactions feel natural and earned, rather than forced and artificial. The game isn't perfect. Eventually, the dialogue starts to repeat, the poker AI becomes predictable, and the novelty wears thin. But that's not really the point. For a brief moment, you really do feel like you're playing poker with these characters. And sometimes that's exactly what we want from our games. Not innovation, not revolution, just a comfortable place to spend time with familiar faces.
Did you know? A lot of the game's dialogue was improvised, with some of the voice actors ad-libbing lines to make conversations feel more natural.
Developed by Junction Point Studios, Epic Mickey was a bold reimagining of Disney's mascot, placing him in a darker, forgotten world populated by obscure characters from Disney's past. The game featured a moral choice system using paint and thinner, allowing players to restore or erase elements of the environment and story. Though its camera work and platforming drew criticism, the game's concept, atmosphere, and reverence for Disney history earned it a dedicated following. Epic Mickey represented a rare fusion of nostalgia and creative risk in a high-profile release. November rounded out the year's heavy-hitting lineup with a balance of familiar thrills and surprising creativity. As 2010 approached its final month, the industry had already experienced one of its most eclectic and influential years. Rounding out the year with a surprising dose of free fun, Doritos Crash Course was a quirky 2D platformer developed as part of Xbox Live's promotional game initiative. Players raced through obstacle courses inspired by game shows like Wipeout and Takeshi's Castle, dodging swinging hammers, collapsing platforms, and other chaotic traps. Though clearly a light-hearted, ad-sponsored release, Crash Course was surprisingly well received, thanks to its tight controls, local multiplayer fun, and pick-up-and-play appeal. It became a couch co-op favorite for many Xbox 360 households, proving that even branded content could leave a mark when done with charm and polish. Looking back, 2010 was a defining year that helped shape the modern gaming landscape. It was a time when new IPs boldly stepped into the spotlight, long-running franchises reinvented themselves, and indie developers began to prove that they could compete on a global stage. The sheer diversity of styles, genres, and ideas released over the course of 12 months is a testament to the creative momentum the industry carried into the decade. From emotionally driven narratives and genre-defining blockbusters to charming oddities and cult classics, 2010 delivered something unforgettable for every kind of gamer. It was a year of experimentation, risk-taking, and evolution, one that continues to influence the games we play today. Well, maybe not this one. Whether you experienced it firsthand or are discovering these titles for the first time, revisiting 2010 is a reminder of just how special a single year in gaming history can be. And with all that said, we finally reached the end of this gigantic project. First off, I'd like to thank everyone that participated and put their time and effort into this project. I know I probably annoyed several of you with my continuous Discord messaging, so thanks for putting up with that. All of my and everyone else's channels and socials are linked down below, so go subscribe to everyone. Now, there was an incredible amount of effort put into this project, and I hope it shows in the end. My computer literally blue screened at one point, and I think I broke a microphone in the process somewhere. Though praised for its charm and storytelling, some fans found it... So yeah, I'm gonna need to buy a new microphone. Special thank you to Hunk for helping out where needed and making all the wonderful thumbnails, and to Mari for drawing my new pimped out suit. And lastly, I want to thank you, the viewer, for sitting through 3 hours of video by a group of people nostalgic about games that released over a decade ago. I appreciate you. And if you liked this video, subscribe. I'm on a mission to play all of the games I never played throughout the years, and I have 287 left. So I'm gonna be here for a while. With all that being said, I've been Xenibus, and I'll see you all in the next video.